Chapter 1284. The pain of his soul collapsing could not be described with words. As an immortal, Thuzad was already immune to most physical attacks. Conversely, the damage that holy attacks could do to him was multiplied. For a divine artifact sword of the divine element to pierce through his soul fire was tantamount to a calamity. The excruciating pain in his soul caused his entire skeletal body to twitch violently as he arched his back. Less than 5 steps away from his feet, the frost dragon Saffron reacted and pounced, stretching its neck to bite him. Crack! When the white dragon teeth closed, it bit empty air. Duque used a gorgeous flash to avoid the frost dragon's determined attack. However, before he drew Duque's moral integrity, Duque gave almost all the holy light he could use to Chairman Ku. Xianxia knelt on the ground. She still had that noble and slightly charming temperament, and her face still had the sorrow of losing her husband and master. This was the person who was once popular in the upper echelons of Stormwind, known as the #1 beauty. No matter when, she was always so charming, so intoxicating. "Hey, are you done acting?" Duque was speechless as he looked at Xianxia, who was seductively hugging his bloodied mirror image doppelganger, who had entered acting mode again. The soul connection was hard to deceive. If Duque was about to die, she would be able to sense it at the first moment. However, it was also because of her acting skills that she could put on a good show, allowing Duque to turn the tables on Thuzad. That's right. Duque had some doubts about the frost divinity that was spreading in the air. Even if Chairman Ku had a lot of business, he could not just throw divinity around, even if it was a very small amount. For high-purity divinity, no matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. So, after Duque broke into the corridor, he directly told the Black Dragon Princess to make a mirror image doppelganger on the dragon's saddle, and he hid near the dragon's wings and turned invisible. In order to make it look real, he even gave all the armor and equipment he used before to the mirror image doppelganger. He suppressed his aura to the lowest possible. Sure enough, it was as expected. The Black Dragon Princess looked smugly at the Great Lich who had stepped into destruction. She frowned slightly and continued to possess the Shadow Queen. Speaking of which, even when this fellow frowned and pretended to be crying for his master, he was still quite handsome. "Woo-woo. Master, you died so miserably." Xianxia howled dryly. Duque bared his teeth. "If she hadn't cried for me, I might have thought that she was so beautiful, so charming, and even pitiful. I might even have wanted to play with her. But now..." Duque raised his leg and kicked Xianxia's plump and bouncy butt. "Time to work. Mount." Xianxia pretended to be unhappy as she rolled her eyes at Duque. She then transformed into her dragon form again and pounced towards the pitiful Saffron. Frankly speaking, without a powerful fighter like the Black Dragon Princess, Duque would have to spend a lot of effort to deal with Saffron. But now that Thuzad was separated from Saffron, the Lich was the Lich and the Bone Dragon was the Bone Dragon. Only 3 Saffron could pose a threat to the Black Dragon Princess. Duque didn't care about the loud battle next to him. In fact, it was a fully armed adult beating up a small child. He stood with his hands behind his back. Under the support of the rising flame base, he floated in front of the Great Lich. Even though he was in extreme pain, Thuzad still used the coldest tone and said sternly, "Duque, don't think that you've won. His Majesty the Lich King will avenge me. He won't torture your soul for billions of years, and he won't let me hear your mournful cries of repentance. The Scourge army will not give up." Duque's thoughts moved. Thuzad immediately screamed. The golden light that gushed out of his chest became stronger. The golden light of this small sun was like a pillar that pierced through his back, and then squeezed out of his chest. What was even more terrifying was that this holy light seemed to have a life of its own. It gently melted Thuzad's ribs, as if it wanted to completely wear down the rotten white bones of his chest until it turned into powder. "No," the Great Lich screamed again. The cold soul fire in his body that seemed to always be maintained at absolute zero finally seemed to have heat that it shouldn't have. It was clearly a flame that was always flickering, but when an even more intense golden light gushed out, golden runes filled with holy aura seemed to grow in the middle of his soul. These runes formed a magic circle that had never been seen before. Oh, it was not a magic circle. This was a brand new holy law that Thuzad had never seen before. This law obviously carried a mark that did not belong to this world. When this mark appeared, It seemed to be forcibly pulling Kel Thuzad's soul out of this mortal world. It forcibly cut off his connection with all mortal things in Azeroth, and prohibited him from extracting all the power in the world. Sadness, fear, hatred, all the negative energy was isolated by this golden mark. Impossible. This is no longer the power of mortals. Kel Thuzad screamed and tried to put his two skeletal palms with only 4 fingers on Duque's shoulder. He had the deepest question. Why? This complicated power that involved the origin of the world, even if it was taken apart and mortals studied it for 1,000,000 years, they might not be able to see through it. Why could Duque do it? Facing Kel Thuzad's confusion, Duque said calmly, "It's not that I'm too strong, it's just that in the field of elements you're too weak. Earth, water, fire, wind, these 4 elements. When you master the mechanism of these 4 basic elements in this world, you can also be like me, isolating opponents with insufficient strength and preventing them from coming into contact with this world. What a pity. You have the frost divinity that Nazul left for you, but you don't know how to use it. Moreover, have you forgotten that this is a fortress left behind by the creation titans of the pantheon? The titans were godlike existences. How could the things they left behind be used by a small Breaking Dawn mage who played with necromancy magic? Apart from Sargeras, who was also a titan, other races and civilizations did not even have the ability to completely master the defense system, let alone modify the program. The law that Duque had just used was the purification law hidden in the fortress. Could amplify the power of the holy system tenfold. Duque just happened to be at the right time, so he used it directly. He didn't have the divinity of the holy system, so he couldn't use Naxxramas. Since he had encountered it, he might as well give it to Kel Thuzad. Chapter 1285. Sighing was just sighing. Duque had no intention of recruiting Chairman Ku. Kel Thuzad wasn't the Black Witch Farina. Farina was bad, but there was no direct conflict or hatred between them. Chairman Ku was different. Duque had reported him in advance and let him bathe in Uther's holy light. In addition, he worshipped Nazul and Arthas. Yes, Duque had tortured Chairman Ku's 2 idols. Nazul was blasted into Kill Jaden's embrace. Second Fool's childhood sweetheart was stolen by Duque, his hand was broken and he suffered a big loss in Felwood. With this blood feud as a foundation, Duque had no intention of letting Kel Thuzad be his elemental emissary. Duque was definitely not interested in such a stubborn and cockroach-like guy. Even if he beat the shit out of him, he could still leave behind a disaster. Alright. In the past, Duque didn't have the ability to destroy souls. Now that he did, he naturally wouldn't hold back. Goodbye, Kel Thuzad. I'll let you be another stepping stone on my hero's path. Duque waved his hand, and the golden light that erupted from Chairman Ku's chest suddenly flourished. The dazzling light became brighter and more intense. When the golden light reached the size of a small sun, Kel Thuzad, an existence that countless people feared and hated, disintegrated into an unknown substance that wasn't even ashes, was forever annihilated from this world. In the undead fantasy, the Alliance hero group was fighting with the remnant souls of the Scourge leaders, or rather, the illusions. Those seemingly huge monster leaders had all kinds of fierce moves and overwhelming power, but they weren't fatal. For some reason, it felt like the attack power of those monster leaders had been severely weakened. For example, the hate boss Patchwork. When he swung his large rusty kitchen knife down, the first impression he gave people was that the earth was shaking. But what he smashed out was a 1-meter square pit. Even Kalia, when she saw Patchwork's slow hand gesture, as long as she wasn't completely distracted by other things, she still wouldn't be killed on the spot. However, the situation of the team was worsening. Benedicta's made a mistake in dodging and was hit until his calf was fractured. Even after first aid, the fracture still hindered his movements. During the fierce battle, Edwin Van Cleef was bitten on the arm by the leader of the Stitched Monsters, the giant dog Glass. There were at least 10 fractures on his left arm. Even so, he still bit the extra dagger in his mouth and continued to fight. Riadaline's back was pierced by the Beetle King Anubri Khan. Even with the emergency healing from the Holy Light spell, the bowl-sized hole on her shoulder blade was a ghastly sight. Although no one in the team had died yet and they were far from reaching their so-called limits, everyone knew that things were not looking good. While everyone in the team was fighting a bloody battle, all the enemies in front of them suddenly disappeared. This is. Gavin Rad slash only hit the air. The feeling of slashing with his sword suddenly turning into nothing made him feel a little uncomfortable. The Windrunner sisters were the first to react. The three of them exclaimed in surprise, Duque? That's right. They and the other heroes all saw Duque. That's right, after going through so many ups and downs, Duque had long become the backbone of the entire alliance. This guy who was constantly making his presence known during times of peace, was the core of the core during times of war. When they couldn't see him, everyone felt a sense of unease. Now almost the instant they saw Duque, everyone's hearts calmed down. Where's Cultivation? Magni was unhappy. Here. Duque curled his lips and pointed at a pile of silver-white ashes on the ground. If the ashes that emitted a faint holy light and frosty aura couldn't tell anything, then the magic accessories that Cultivation wore on the pile of ashes could definitely tell the truth. You destroyed Cultivation? Sylvanas was still a little unsure of what was going on. You don't believe me? Duque shrugged. There was no reply. That hot kiss that almost burned Duque's lips was the best answer. Wow. Gavin Rad whistled. At this moment, a violent rumbling sound came. Only then did everyone turn back to look at the earth-shattering battle at the side. Actually, everyone didn't really ignore the Black Dragon Princess. It was just that everyone saw Xianxia pressing down on Saffron's dragon head with her claws and biting off his long tail at the same time. For a battle like this where the winner was already decided, everyone was a little uninterested. Roar! Saffron struggled with all his might. He furiously dug the ground beneath him. The beautiful floorboards were lifted up in pieces, revealing the black soil underneath. He even dug a large pit under his body, which was ridiculous. Poor fellow, accept your fate. Xianxia laughed sinisterly, and with a leap she dodged Saffron's attack. Then she rode on Saffron's back and bit the back of Saffron's neck. But everyone knew that it was over. At this moment, Duque flashed and appeared not far from Saffron. Xianxia had almost completely bitten off Saffron's cervical vertebrae, leaving only a little bit of connection. She let go and used her two front claws to press down on Saffron's skull and back. She yelled angrily, "Behave." Originally, Saffron was still struggling with all his might. Suddenly he stopped. Because something that looked like a compass was emitting an aura that made his entire body stiffen. It clearly said, "I'm busy," in dragon language, but that did not stop Duque from changing the concept and using it as a flag. Clear dragon language flowed out of Duque's mouth. "Lost dragon soul. Wake up. I summon you in the name of Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza of the Sleeping Dragon Temple." The simple compass had a typical dragon rule. Even though it was activated by Duque's somewhat unreliable fire divinity, the effect was not bad. It seemed that such a rule could devour all of Saffron's negative emotions and guide him to find his reason. Suddenly, an icy blue power began to flow between Saffron's gray bones. A dragon-shaped illusion appeared and wrapped around the dragon bones. With the dragon bones as the core, semi-illusory blue dragon skin began to cover the entire dragon skeleton. Saffron's soul? Kalia muttered to herself. Phew. Saffron surprisingly did not show any intention to attack. Duque waved his hand. Xianxia backed off a little, but she still stared at Saffron. "Saffron, are you awake?" Chapter 1286. Whoosh. Whoosh. Alexstrasza's will, which had lost its controller and was lured here by Duque, suppressed its stubbornness, anger, and resentment. Saffron finally woke up from his confused state. "What did I do?" It was in Draconic. "You were killed by Arthas, and then your soul and body were enslaved," Duque said as he used his mental power to remove the fog in Saffron's soul. There were some things that, once imprinted in the deepest part of one's soul, could not be completely erased from one's soul unless one completely destroyed it. Saffron suddenly roared, I remember now, that wretched Arthas. Bastard. Percent our $at. The dragon's roar sounded like slang, but also like a meaningless syllable that vented anger. Anyway, the system elf translated it for Duque as a bunch of garbled code. In order to control this frost dragon, Arthas had suppressed Saffron's memories and sealed most of his soul and memories. Now that Cultivation was no longer there, Saffron, who had returned to his original nature, naturally lost his temper. Duque and the others were not annoyed and just watched Saffron throw a tantrum. Finally, Saffron was done. Even with his once noble status, he had to lower his noble head at this moment, especially when Duque was still holding Alexstrasza's compass. He subconsciously believed that Duque represented the Dragon Sleep Temple. How is the Dragon Sleep Temple going to deal with me? Of course, Duque could not answer. Do you think you can return to the Dragonbone Wasteland? Every dragon that was about to die, or even after it died, its soul longed to return to the Dragonbone Wasteland to sleep forever. This was many times stronger than the genetic code that was imprinted in the deepest part of the gene. It was an instinct that could not be defied from the deepest part of the soul. But Saffron knew that he had lost that right forever. A fallen soul did not have the right to return to the Dragonbone Wasteland with his companions and ancestors. Of course, there was another way, which was to be nailed to the door of the Dragon Sleep Temple as a sinful traitor like Nesario. That was not what Saffron wanted. Now he was a completely ownerless lonely soul. After saying the word, 3 times, Saffron still couldn't continue. It doesn't matter if you're killed or if you're forcibly enslaved with your soul and broken body. However, the killings and sins you committed when you were a frost dragon can't be completely erased. You need to atone for your sins, do you understand? Fraud Du patiently guided the blue dragon's soul, whose IQ had already dropped a little. How can I atone? Duque raised his chin slightly. After the titans of the Pantheon conquered planet Azeroth, they handed over the responsibility of guarding the planet to the Pentashade dragons of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. Now Azeroth was facing the invasion of the Burning Legion led by the traitor of the Pantheon, Sardras, and the erosion of the ancient god Thun and other evil forces. All you have to do is carry out your duty as a guardian in a just war. You are the atonement. Duque's words made sense and Saffron was speechless. He nodded his dragon head almost subconsciously. Duque snapped his fingers and Onyxia obediently transformed into a human form and came to Duque's left side. Duque smoothly stroked her hair with his left hand. See this guy? She abandoned the evil alignment and fought for justice under me, the guardian of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. Now Her Majesty Alexstrasza has promised that as long as she performs well, she will be accepted back into the Sleeping Dragon Temple in the future. At this point, Onyxia's body trembled. To be honest, she didn't care whether she could return to the Sleeping Dragon Temple or not. What she cared about was Duque's terrifying influence. Saffron's soul trembled violently and he asked in a trembling voice, Can you speak to Her Majesty Alexstrasza? Coincidentally, Duque saw that the pointer of the compass had pointed to on duty. Duque decisively put the compass on the ground and smashed a dragon language spell on it. It wasn't any advanced spell. It was purely to activate the communicator with the Red Dragon Queen. The next second, a unique pressure reverberated throughout the hall. When an illusory red dragon head with the height of a 2-story building was projected in the hall, everyone felt as if a long and distant cry rose in their hearts. This sharp cry came from the ancient times 25,000 years ago. It was a majesty that was filled with the sedimentation of history. She was the perfect combination of nobility, beauty, ferocity, and strength. The aftershock of her soul easily crashed into the depths of everyone's hearts. Everyone's hearts contracted due to their nervousness. After exhaling, their lungs forgot to expand and breathe in fresh air again. Everyone felt a little suffocated. However, Alexstrasza quickly retracted her aura. Oh, it's Duque. Sorry, I just came from the Void battlefield, the queen replied casually. What's the matter? It's about this guy you mentioned a while ago. I kicked her and asked how many merits she needs to return to the Dragon Slumber Temple. Duque first grabbed Onyxia's neck like a little chick and forced her to take 2 steps forward. Onyxia didn't dare to look directly at the queen. The queen's huge yellow eyes blinked. Although she didn't know why Duque would ask at this time, she still answered, If we can successfully seal Thun this time, this merit will be enough. At least Nozdormu won't object. He has the most opinions right now. Alright, the second thing. I just dealt with Saffron's soul. Can you help me inform Malygos? Alexstrasza turned her head. She had obviously sensed Saffron's soul long ago, but she sighed now. You shouldn't have asked me. Yes, she couldn't speak directly about the Blue Dragon army. Even Malygos didn't have many soldiers under him. After all, overstepping his authority was overstepping his authority. At this point, Saffron's expression couldn't help but become gloomy. At this time Duque suddenly said, if I let Saffron make enough merits, can you consider letting his soul return to the Dragonbone wasteland in the future? The dragon race's way of dealing with the fallen was to kill them directly and then destroy everything with a dragon breath. Alexstrasza was a bit troubled by Duque's sudden suggestion. After all, Duque was also considering this from the perspective of the Dragon Slumber Temple. After thinking for a while, Alexstrasza finally said, I hereby promise that if any of the fallen dragons choose to redeem themselves and make enough merits, I will initiate a motion at the Dragon King's conference. I will initiate a motion during the Dragon King conference. As long as I get more than half of the Dragon Kings agree, I will be able to let the lost souls return to Dragonbone Waste. Chapter 1287. The weight of this sentence was definitely as heavy as a mountain. It could be said to be the most important thing in her words. Duque was pleasantly surprised by the Red Dragon Queen's decision, but he was not surprised. This was the inevitable choice of history. It was a time of war, and war was bound to be accompanied by sacrifices. Dragons were indeed at the top of the food chain on planet Azeroth. However, their tragic fertility and long growth time meant that the dragon army would only get weaker and weaker in such a fierce war. As long as demons did not die in the Twisted Nether, their souls could theoretically run back and be resurrected indefinitely. Under such circumstances, finding ways to replenish their troops became the biggest issue that the Dragon Sleep Temple could not avoid. After killing Nesario, the four-colored dragons had vented their hatred. However, under the situation of the Burning Legion's continuous attacks, the weakening of the protective circle due to the absence of the Earth Guardian, and the increase in casualties was also there. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the decision to recruit Onyxia into the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, and the fact that a fallen soul was allowed to return after redeeming itself. If it was the Dragon Sleep Temple of the past, they would not have even thought about it. Rules were dead and dragons were alive. Alexstrasza wasn't stupid enough to challenge the rules with her limited lifespan. Just like the Alliance later in history, Death Knights, Demon Hunters and so on openly joined the Alliance camp. Now that the Red Dragon Queen had given an opening, if Duque still did not know how to behave, then he would have lived in vain. Since the Queen had given Duque a free hand, who would take advantage of it? Of course it would be Duque. Yo, old dragon, you have a redemption scroll that is about to expire. May I ask if you want to use it? If you want to use it, please sign this indenture. Everyone could see that Duque was up to no good. However, no one could be jealous. Firstly, those who could sneak into the Alliance's hero squad were either kings or true heroes. Secondly, Duque's experience, status and methods were not something they could imitate. Want to take a dragon as a follower? Sure. You could save the Red Dragon Queen first, or kill the Black Dragon King's entire family. Kill the males and take the females as mounts. If it was just a little bit off, perhaps some people would be envious and jealous. But if the difference was too great, then they could only worship him. At this time, Duque slowly walked towards the ashes left behind by Cal Thuzad's death. He reached in and fished out one of the biggest spoils of war. Yes, it was the contract scroll left behind by Nizul. The scroll had the inheritance of the Lich King's frost divinity. Oh, it's Alexstrasza. Can you do me a favor? Duque waved the scroll. On the huge red dragon's face, everyone could see the Queen's eyes roll. *CK, other than Duque, there was no one else who could take advantage of the Red Dragon Queen. However, since Duque had helped her redeem the soul of an important blue dragon, and Angela still needed to rely on Duque's intelligence for the rest of her plan, the Queen decided to help him. A portal with a diameter of at least 10 meters appeared in the void. The next moment, a red dragon claw that could easily grab a steam tank reached out. The black dragon claw with a perfect arc reached forward and tapped lightly. A drop of exuberant green life aura entered the scroll just like that. Done. Then the dragon claw retracted and disappeared without a trace. Others might think that Lich King Nizul's power was pure shadow element death energy, but that was not the case. He who had long wanted to rebel had intentionally or unintentionally used the frost element that was completely different from the Burning Legion's warlocks as his main power. But when it came to purifying this kind of old demon, it was better for Duque to borrow the hands of others. After all, holy power, moral integrity and so on, Duque did not even have enough for himself. After purifying the shadow element, all that was left was the pure frost divinity. After casually saying a few words, the queen turned off the projection. Duque did not start absorbing the frost divinity on the spot because that would be asking for death. Since ancient times, there had been all kinds of mages who crossed paths. There was the arcane ice element and the frost element, then the arcane fire element, the pure arcane element, and so on. But there were no idiots who played with fire and ice. It was not that it was absolutely impossible, but the problem was very big. The essence of ice and fire was in conflict. Whether it was the element itself or the various metamagic abilities, they were all opposites that fought to the death. Secondly, without the arcane circuit as a foundation, the endurance would be very poor. One could be a three-element great mage of fire, arcane and frost. Note that there was a prerequisite, and that was to have a sufficiently powerful arcane magic circuit as a buffer. Therefore, before mastering the arcane divinity, Duque did not dare to directly absorb the frost divinity. One had to know that the flame divinity in his body was produced by Ragnaros and was extremely violent. If he rashly absorbed the frost divinity of the Lich King, he might explode on the spot. In addition, why was it said to be one of the biggest spoils of war? Because there was another highlight. Duque took out the Atish legendary guardian's staff from his storage space. Although it was already emitting a strong magical wave, it was still not systematic and always stirred up turbulence of magical power. Duke's heart was beyond excited. That's right. He had already sensed that the body of the staff was made of 40 fragments, plus the head of the staff itself. The last remaining part of this artifact staff, the staff's tail, was just 10 meters in front of him. There at a glance was an empty wall. Only the connection between the artifact parts told Duque that it was where Kel-Thuzad's treasure was located. Open. Duque waved the drumstick-shaped staff, and 3 translucent black crows appeared from the top of the staff. They flapped their wings through the phantom fog and circled above the treasure chest. A second later, the illusion collapsed and every expert from the Alliance couldn't help but let out a sigh. The huge treasure chest with silver skull carvings made a clatter, sound and opened by itself. An inconspicuous wooden thing flew out, drew a gorgeous blue-purple arc in the air, and finally deftly embedded itself at the end of the staff in Duque's hand. In the next instant, the artifact staff that Duque held high bloomed with a brilliant glow. Powerful arcane magic fluctuations surged out like raging waves. Even though it did not cause any damage to people, they still felt as if they were standing on a beach, being tossed up and down by a huge wave several meters high. They could not stand steadily at all. Wow! Gavin Rad's mouth opened wide enough to fit an apple. Boss, why do I feel like your artifact is much more powerful than mine? Unexpected things happen one after another. As if it was provoked, Magni's, Savra's hand of Ragnaros the Balrog, ignored its owner's will and burst out a blazing light, forming a fire pillar that would take 3 people to wrap their arms around it and burst into the sky. Chapter 1288. This pillar of fire didn't cause any damage. It was simply a demonstration of its unwillingness to be left out. Seeing that Magni, who had his mouth wide open, didn't even use God's descent, he knew. Without further ado, Theon's Ashbringer and Gavin Rad's wind sword burst out with dazzling light at the same time. A blazing pillar of fire, a holy golden pillar of light, and a pillar of wind and lightning surrounded by lightning. In their own way, these 3 divine artifacts made a threatening declaration to the divine artifact staff in Duque's hand. The humming mixed with the light made everyone gasp in amazement. Soon the winner of this divine artifact competition was decided. The radiance of Atish in Duke's hand grew brighter and brighter. The purplish-blue light became the only theme in this space. Even the frost around the hall was dyed red. At this moment something happened that left Duque speechless. 3 black, translucent crows appeared again, making unpleasant caw caw caw. To put it nicely, it was a clear sound, but to put it bluntly, it was a pain in the ass. This reminded Du Mohan of the cartoons he had watched in his childhood. Whenever the time came to complain, there would be a black crow flying elegantly in the sky. As it flew, it would shout, "Idiot! Idiot! Idiot!" Yes, the drumstick was just that F** cat up. It just so happened that this strange scene made a new development in the situation. With the crow's cry, Theon's Ashbringer was fine, but the other two divine artifacts suddenly withered. Was it because their souls had suffered 100,000 damage and they couldn't even lift their heads, or was it something else? Well, to be honest, it really was spiritual damage. The powerful system ALF intercepted a telepathic transmission that was similar to a video transmission from Atish. As for what it was exactly, it couldn't be completely analyzed. However, there were two scenes that were certain. One was Duque leading a team to kill Ragnaros, and the other was Duque defeating the Wind Prince. This was clearly the drumstick's announcement. Your former masters were all defeated by my master, and your masters are all my master's subordinates. Alright. Duque was dumbfounded. He almost wanted to spread out the legendary brush and ink on the spot and write a word of admiration for Atish. Damn it, even though you're a godly staff at your level, you still know how to use data to slap people in the face. There's no one else like you. Seeing that the fire demon hammer and wind sword had admitted defeat, Atish let out an even more melodious crow call. Quack quack quack. It was cheerful and hurried, looking for a beating. How arrogant. Duque swore that if this thing wasn't his divine artifact rod, he would definitely find a chance to dismantle it into parts. What was it again? Whoever likes it can take it. Teacher Duque. Can I touch it? On the other side, Jaina had already run over. She clasped her hands tightly, and her eyes were already the standard starry eyes of a star chaser. She was acting coquettishly and cute at the same time. If it was someone else's artifact, she would be too embarrassed to touch it and study it. But as for Duque, as Duque's disciple and partner, he had special rights no matter what. No problem. Duque very straightforwardly handed over the drumstick. Of course, just in case he didn't let go. At the same time, he sent a strong thought to Atish. This is your master's chick, don't hurt her or I'll dismantle you. Immediately Atish sent back a thought. No problem, you and me, who's with whom? Something that left everyone dumbfounded happened again. Not only did Atish read Duque's memories and hum out the famous melody of Ode to Joy, he also made 3 illusory crows perch on Jaina's hands and shoulders, letting out low caws as if they were trying to please her. Their long curved beaks gently rubbed against Jaina's delicate face. Duque's mouth turned into a standard O shape on the spot. Damn it! Wasn't this the divine artifact passed down by Saint Medivh? How did it become so shameless? Was it really like its master? Kikik. Jaina laughed happily. Surprises came one after another. Suddenly, a large pop-up window popped up in the system, taking up almost half of Duque's field of vision. Your divine artifact, Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian, is transferring arcane divinity to the host. Do you accept? Duque was stunned for a full 3 seconds. What did it mean by, one can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, but find it by chance without any effort? That was it. 20 years. It had been too long. So long that Duque had already forgotten that the drumstick's previous owner, Medivh, was also a demigod. That's right. Medivh was a demigod great arcanist with the title Astral Wanderer. He was also proficient in 3 elements, but he was most famous for spatial magic based on the arcana. Duque didn't expect much at all. He was already very happy to be able to gather Atish and get a divine artifact. Who knew that there would be additional divinity as the grand prize? Haha. Arcane divinity. Arcane divinity. I can become a demigod this time. Excitement. Ecstasy. Exhilaration. Duque didn't know how to describe his current feelings. 22 years. He had traveled to Azeroth for a full 22 years. From a worthless young man who had almost nothing to his name who could be humiliated by any random noble, to the #1 person in the Alliance today, a super expert who was about to break through to the demigod level. Duque had gone through a lot of hardships. Thinking back on the many times he had narrowly escaped death, or rather the painful experience of dying and coming back to life, Duque still felt that it was unbelievable. Humans were always unsatisfied. Or rather, desire was the driving force for humans to move forward. He had thought that it would be good if he could just muddle through life and not become a ghoul. He hated aging and longed for immortality. He didn't want to live forever and longed for power. What did he want? Wasn't it to live better? Perhaps with great power came great responsibility. But so what? He was used to carrying the burden of the world's future anyway, so there was nothing to be afraid of. After all, with great responsibility came great benefits. Yo. Everyone, what do we do? I'm so excited now. I want to kiss all of you. In the whisper of the wind, Duque said excitedly. Originally, his relationship with his lovers was kept a secret. Rumors were just rumors. If he didn't admit it publicly, no one could do anything to Duque and them. Although in theory a few of the queens were already over 30 years old, with the eternal blessing, age had lost its meaning and no one could say anything. At this moment, Duque was trying to stir up trouble and make everything clear. As soon as Duque said this, Jaina was the first to enjoy the benefits and kissed him without hesitation. So fragrant. Looking at the silver line connecting the lips of this so-called master and disciple, Gavin Rad was embarrassed. But this was just the beginning. Chapter 1289. Aurelia moved quickly. She was the second to pounce on Jaina the moment she finished kissing Duque. Her slender and muscular arms wrapped around Duque, and this time it was a longer French kiss. The third was Sasha. She said in Duque's ear without hesitation, "Congratulations in advance." If the first three candidates weren't surprising to others, then the last three would be shocking to the public. Alicia Barev, the Queen of Alterac, and Kalia Menethil, the Queen of Lordaeron, were a little shy. They held hands and gave Duke a light kiss, one after the other. Even Sylvanas, the Queen of Sindorii, made an apologetic expression at Riadeline before lining up to kiss her like a moth to a flame. What was most surprising was that after 2 seconds of hesitation, Tyrande, the high priestess of the Night Elves, who was said to have dedicated everything to the goddess Elune, was at the end of the line. Tyrande's holy face revealed a cunning expression as she faced her royal and general teammates, who had been struck by lightning. She gestured for them to keep quiet. "Shh. For the sake of being teammates, don't tell the Night Elves. As for the goddess, she knows." Fortunately, everyone here was a hardcore member of the Alliance. Also, as one got older, they matured a lot. Their mouths were all tight. Otherwise, if it was leaked, it would definitely be huge news that would shake the entire Night Elven race. Gavin Rad was first surprised, then envious, and finally pounded his chest. He almost turned into a member of the FFF team and burned Duque and the others. Damn it. Should we celebrate our victory and show off our love? Half of the beauties in the hero team belong to you. Do I still want to live? Theon patted Gavin Rad's shoulder. Yo, don't forget you're a paladin. Gavin Rad said bitterly, "Don't worry, I'm envious at most. I won't be jealous." He turned and ran over. "Boss, teach me Cannon Girl's godly skills, okay?" On the other side, Riadeline also smiled bitterly. Well, the Queen of the Alliance has been taken by Duque. Let's see how Duque deals with this. Aurelia hugged Duque and whispered in Duque's ear, "I heard that once you become a demigod, your soul will stabilize. If that's the case, I want to have a monkey with you. Give birth to a monkey." Aurelia had learned this from Duque. Hearing this, Duque could only smile bitterly. "I haven't become a demigod yet. I heard it's very dangerous." "We believe that you will succeed," the 3 Windrunner sisters said in unison. "If it's monkeys, I want them too," Sasha added weakly. Seeing the envious looks on the faces of the other queens, Duque could not help but laugh. Aurelia and Sasha did not have a crown to wear, so they naturally did not have that many taboos. The queens, on the other hand, were in trouble. As queens, it would be hard to explain if someone died without a formal wedding. "Children. I'll talk to Elune and see if we can create a child of the gods," Tyrande said as if she was talking to herself, but it was no different from pointing out a slightly exaggerated path for them. The secular world did not allow polygamy and multiple queens. If a demigod was not enough, what about a true god? Any being who entered the divine realm would definitely have a transcendent status. Actually, Duque only needed to enter the divine realm and become a demigod, and that would be enough. Whoosh. We'll talk about that later. Let me see my divine staff. Duque held a tiche in his left hand, and a series of data appeared in his vision. System detection, frowny face, a tiche, legendary staff of the Guardian. Level 6 divine staff, limit. Level 9 staff for the Azeroth Guardian. Its previous owners were Aegwynn and Medivh. Aegwynn once killed Sargeras in a duel. Although it was part of an act, Aegwynn did cause considerable damage to Sargeras' soul and body, causing Sargeras' incubation period to be longer than expected. In addition, in the Battle of Karazhan, Medivh used its power to destroy the staff and sent Sardras into the bottomless abyss. Atish, soulbound to Duke Marcus. 130 to 244 damage speed 2. 90, damage per second 64. 4. Plus 31 endurance plus 32 intelligence plus 24 spirit durability 145 up to this point. Atish's data was still the same as in Duke's memory. But from there on things took a turn. Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian. Guardian special effect 1, space lock. Any existence that enters the world of Azeroth will have nowhere to hide in front of you. You can ignore space barriers, increase the chance of your spells hitting the enemy by 100%, and increase the damage and healing effect by 2000 points. Guardian special effect 2, Arcane Dominator. All friendly members within a radius of 300 yards have a 20% chance of dealing a fatal blow with damaging spells. Increase the range by 200 yards, and increase the damage and healing effect by 100 points. Guardian special effect 3, Astral Wanderer. Within the range of the planet Azeroth, you can open intercontinental teleportation doors with 1/10 of the normal magic power required. The number of teleportation doors, their carrying capacity, and the magic power required to maintain them depend on your understanding of space coordinates. Outside of Azeroth, you can complete more than teleportation with 1/5 of your magic power. For any form of space barrier, your chance of cracking it increases by 20%. Guardian's special effect 4? After reading it in one breath, Duke was overjoyed. If it was the Atish in the game, it could only be regarded as the glory of the Molten Core in this level 60 era. Although it was rare, even looking at the entire national server, there were only 1167 players who had it, but after all it was not the only one in the world. After coming to the real world, he now had the blessing of the Guardian Halo. Only then did this divine artifact magic staff show its true potential. Ignoring the weak ordinary attribute bonuses, just the known special effects exclusive to the 3 Guardians were extremely awesome. Duke suddenly understood a little why the basic attribute bonuses of this artifact were so low. If the bonuses of endurance and intelligence were also super high, then this artifact would not be grade 6 but grade 9. Duke had no clue how to upgrade this artifact staff. Duke planned to find Medivh or his mother Egwene when he had time. Surprises came one after another. At first, Duke's moral integrity only provided additional fire attribute bonuses because the magic power supply was not perfect. Now it was completely different. The system prompted him to inject more divinity into the spiral sword. However, it is strongly recommended that the host carry out the injection of elemental divinity after advancing to the demigod level. Chapter 1290. After all, the previous system notification said, if you can absorb more elemental divinity, the power of the divine sword will be greatly increased. Now it was strongly recommended to come back after leveling up. There was only one explanation. Injecting it after leveling up would be more beneficial to Duke. If Duke was still in a slightly confused state before, now Duke had completely understood that the time to break through to demigod had come. As long as he finished up the work in Naxxramas, with Atish, Duke was now a genuine guardian of Azeroth. If there was anything different between him and the previous guardians, it was that he lacked the demigod magic that was infused by all the members of the Tirisfal Council. That wasn't important. As long as he broke through to demigod, everything would be solved. Duke lifted Atish gently and immediately felt that his arcane magic circuit had increased by more than 200%. The surging magic power reverberated in the huge circuit formed by the connection between himself and the divine artifact staff. If Duke, who was a third-class Breaking Dawn, was able to produce large rivers and lakes of mana every second, he would feel like he was in the middle of an ocean right now. Duke turned to face the soul of the ice dragon and said loudly, Saffron, I ask you, are you willing to be under my command and become my exclusive elemental emissary? Fight to protect the world of Azeroth, wash away your sins, and achieve the ultimate goal of returning your soul to the Temple of Dragon Sleep? There was nothing to think about. Saffron, who was in soul form, lowered his proud head. I am willing. Duke didn't say anything else. He raised his staff high and a beam of blue light shot toward Saffron's huge soul. Like silk being spun from a cocoon, Everyone vaguely saw countless black threads being drawn out of Saffron's soul and dissipating in the air. Then the frost aura in the entire hall began to gather on Saffron's spiritual body. A series of sizzling sounds rang out. Under Duque's extraordinary magic power, not only Saffron, but even the hall they were in felt like it was being frozen. It was just that one was coming out and the other was coming in. As the entire space began to become illusory, Saffron's soul began to materialize. The ugly white bones were covered by muscles formed by the condensation of elements. Then a dragon's skin as white as snow appeared out of thin air. 10 seconds later, there was one less fallen bone dragon in the world, and one more elemental dragon that was transformed from the purest frost element. From this moment on, Saffron became an elemental creature similar to the fire phoenix. After dealing with Saffron, it was time to split the loot. The Alliance heroes quickly and simply picked out the epic equipment that they wanted. Of course, Naxxrama's equipment was only at level 80. The rest of the equipment was equivalent to level 60 in the game, so the 15 of them were not interested in it. They would probably leave it for William and the rest. On this day in the Cenarian fortress in the north of Silithus, the battle was still at a stalemate. Although the allied forces had gathered the elites of the Alliance, the Horde and the Dragon race, they were still unable to push the battle to the wall of beetles in the middle of Silithus, let alone the temple of Ankh-Karaj. Grom Hellhowl, who was covered in mud, was covered in green and yellow. These were the body fluids of the insects. After solidifying, not only did they emit a foul smell but they also looked very funny. Lord Howl, who had retreated to the fortress, could not help but complain to Thrall, "Great Chief, how long are we going to defend? If we really can't, we can form an assault team and destroy some damned insect nest first." Thrall did not answer directly. Instead he asked, "How many elites do you think the Horde will sacrifice to achieve this goal?" Lord Howl was stunned. His expression was one of unwillingness at first, but then it turned gloomy. Although the Horde had brought tens of thousands of people this time, they did not even need to compare it with the thousands of elites who had attacked Blackrock Mountain. Just by looking at the old and the young, one could tell that this Horde army was just for show. It was now the 7th year of the westward expedition. It was far from enough for the new generation of orcs to grow up. Those 5 or 6-year-old children would need at least 10 more years before they could barely fight. There were only 100,000 orcs in the westward expedition. After the conflict with the Night Elves in Grey Valley, the Burning Legion's invasion of Mount Hyjal, and the latest battle with the beetles, it could be said that almost all the orcs who could fight were here. Without the support of the Tauren, trolls and goblins, the Horde would not even be able to gather 100,000 troops. The Tauren had never been a race with a large population. To be able to bring out 5,000 soldiers was already the result of Kane's full support. Wajin's Darkspear clan was also a branch of the trolls. 10,000 soldiers was the limit. If this army was all lost here, then the Horde did not need to say anything. If the Alliance turned against them, they would have to destroy themselves here. This time, the Horde's territory was the most directly affected by the swarm of insects. If the Alliance was ruthless enough, they could wait until the Horde's warriors were all killed, and then come to pick up the spoils. The Alliance was also suffering from internal and external problems. For them to be able to bring out so many troops so quickly, everyone in the Horde with a bit of brains felt that the Alliance was very generous. Although the situation was not good, the stupid insects would not learn to intercept the Alliance's supply railway. With the continuous flow of firearms, the battle-loss ratio was still very eye-catching. Often, the death of 100 giant insects taller than the orcs was the sacrifice of one Alliance or Horde warrior. In a situation where the Alliance's priests were so powerful, as long as they were not beheaded on the spot and dragged to the rear, even if they were still breathing, they could be saved. Therefore, when Duque made it clear that they would wait until they dealt with Naxxramas or Zul Gura before taking further action, Sal and Wajin raised their limbs and voted in favor. Not many people would die, and it would allow the young orc warriors to gain valuable combat experience. This kind of good thing did not happen every day. Other than the worry that after the Alliance and the Horde joined forces, it would increase the possibility of the Horde being annexed, there was nothing bad about it. Just as Grom was about to leave, Sal and the others suddenly heard a shrill cry. "Warning! There are army-level insects." Army-level insects were super-large insects that could only be killed by an entire army. Thrall and Grom turned their heads and saw the mountain-like beetle in the distance. Again, Damn it. There are more and more of these things recently. Grom spat fiercely, then picked up his blood howl and turned to leave. Wait. Let's go together. Army-level insects also meant the terrible vitality of the insects. Although the attack power of that thing was not too terrible, the giant beetle was basically immune to existing artillery fire. If it was allowed to rush to the edge of the fortress, it would undoubtedly greatly affect the line of defense. Once the line of defense collapsed, it would be filled with human lives. In the absence of the main force of the alliance, the lives of the horde warriors would naturally be filled. At this moment, there was a sudden roar of cannons from the clouds. Obviously, it was a terrifying cannon that far exceeded all the cannons in the Cenarian fortress. One shot overturned the army-level giant insects. There was Duque's laughter in the air. Yo. Looks like we made it. Chapter 1291. Giant ships, cannons, countless men's dreams. Sal and the tribal warriors looked up at the sky. At first they thought it was another flying ship like the Skybreaker. Obviously they were wrong. It was flying, yes, but it was not a giant ship but a huge fortress. No one would forget the terrible figure that once wreaked havoc in the main cities of the major races. In the eyes of many ignorant tribal people, it was almost a scourge. It was boundless, floating in the sky, and there was no way to fight it. Every person could only hide in the main city with the strongest defense, trembling, listening to the terrible wail of death lingering in the sky, waiting for the judgment of extinction to come. Cannons couldn't hit, magic couldn't reach, and the two-footed flying dragons that were sent out would only be brutally wiped out by gargoyles more than 10 times their number. Every tribal warrior still clearly remembered the humiliating days when they could only be beaten in pain and unable to fight back. Now what was this? Directly south of Cenarian Fortress, Naxxramas slowly descended from the sky. It swooped down violently, sweeping away large swathes of clouds, and stood between the allied forces and the swarm of insects in an extremely domineering manner. It easily blocked the insects flying from the south. Above Naxxramas in the sky, there was still the terrible giant skull relief. But the shape was a bit like a roly-poly doll with a square bottom and a conical top composed of 4 edges. The 4 corners of the fortress fluttered in the wind with the Alliance's blue background and golden border lion flags. Even though Naxxramas looked much more dilapidated than before, there was a very obvious big hole facing the north. This should be what the Alliance said in the report to the tribe, that it was blown up by the floating city Dalajan. Even so, Naxxramas was still a daunting fortress. Soon the fortress opened fire. As soon as they arrived, they unleashed a barrage of bullets. Many of the insects were badly mutilated, and their broken bodies and limbs fell from the sky. Huh. Sal frowned immediately. Great Chief, you also noticed? Woken said. Yes. Naxxramas' firepower is much weaker than I remember. As soon as Sal finished speaking, he found that Jaina had come. That's because after the Alliance seized Naxxramas, they discovered that many of the shadow magic towers couldn't be used. Jaina's crisp and slightly intellectual voice was pleasant to the ear no matter the time. Sal did not know that because of Du Zhe's appearance, his personal relationship with Jaina was destined to be 2 parallel lines that would never intersect. Seeing Jaina, who was supposed to be the core member of the assault team, appear in front of him so calmly, how could Sar not know the outcome? Still, he asked in disbelief, did the Alliance really take over Naxxramas? Jaina nodded. Yes, the evil soul of the great Lich Kel, Thizad, has been completely purified. From today onwards, the former Scourge stronghold, Naxxramas, belongs to the Alliance. Sal and other tribal chiefs have an indescribable feeling in their hearts. Once upon a time, they thought that by going west to Kalimdor, they could get rid of the Alliance's control. As long as they could gain a foothold in this slightly barren land, they might be able to compete with the Alliance across the sea. If the establishment of Theramore was a nail in the hinterland of the tribe, and the Night Elves joining the Alliance was to further suppress the expansion space of the tribe, then this floating stronghold was obviously the scythe of death hanging over the tribe's head. Since the Scourge army could use Naxxramas to hang the major cities of the tribe, the Alliance could do the same. No, it could even be more than that. When the city of Duroder was first built, the tribe was very excited. At that time, the tribe's territory was also small. Who would have thought that Duque's arrangements were so far-reaching, attacking the new main city of the orcs from the south and north? It was not obvious at first, but as the tribe continued to expand their settlements throughout the continent in order to compete for resources, they found that there was a noose around the tribe's neck, slowly strangling the tribe to death. The alliance did not take the initiative to attack the tribe. After all, it was the insects that were slaughtering the people of the tribe. On the contrary, the alliance still appeared in front of the tribe as allies and saviors. "Oh. Next it's up to the alliance," Sal answered and sighed. In fact, the situation of the tribe could be described in one sentence. People who do not think far ahead will have immediate worries. If they did not deal with the raging insects, there was no threat to the alliance at all. In mid-air, the huge floating stronghold suddenly seemed to disassemble itself, and several huge decorations on the outer wall fell from the air. "That is," Sal murmured. Jaina laughed. How could the alliance want that kind of decoration again? At this time, everyone saw clearly that it was Naxxramas who threw down the large skull relief sculpture that was the size of 10 football fields from the outer wall of the upper half of the stronghold. Yes, the alliance was not pirates, nor was it the Scourge army. This kind of decoration that was meant to scare people, the alliance would definitely not use it. The huge stone sculpture smashed down from 1,000 meters high, and immediately there was a tremor in the mountains. Of course, the effect was also obvious. The stone sculpture that was 30 meters thick came crashing down, and in the eyes of the insects, the scene was like the sky falling down. The huge and seemingly endless shadow pressed down, and the insects in the middle had no place to hide and were crushed into meat sauce on the spot. Splat. The insect slurry that splashed out from the cracks of the broken stone sculpture was a full 10 stories high. On the stronghold 2,000 meters away, almost every Alliance soldier who witnessed this scene could not help but grit their teeth. Immediately they let out the most enthusiastic cheers. "Ha ha ha ha. Good. Kill those brainless insects. Long live the Alliance." Under the watchful eyes of the 100,000 Alliance soldiers on duty, Naxxramas moved again, slowly flying to the southeast of Cenarian's stronghold. The two strongholds, one on the ground and one in the air, formed a triangle with each other. Naxxramas descended. Because the speed of its descent was very slow, even when it landed on the ground, it did not cause much shaking. It only flattened several large sand dunes. On the side facing the railway, the stronghold opened a super gate that was at least 20 stories high, and a ramp that was 30 degrees from the ground descended. Jaina laughed. The Alliance is going to arm the entire Naxxramas stronghold as a mobile base to advance the front line. Now, on behalf of the Alliance Commander Duke Marcus, I officially request the Horde to send about 2 clans of troops as the garrison of the stronghold. After that, Jaina showed Sal an official document written in both Orc and human common language, stamped with the seal of the Alliance Command. Chapter 1292. At this moment, above Naxxramas, Magni was desperately complaining to his subordinates. "Not enough. Not enough. Not enough at all. Didn't we inherit the will of the great Duke Marcus, the destruction dwarves who boast that explosions are art? What's the use of this small water gun? When did we become the destruction dwarves?" The orange-red bearded dwarf quartermaster, Derek Banksu, complained in a low voice. "Answer my question, quartermaster." Magni roared. "Sorry, Your Majesty, our ships are all full. Although the supplies have been transported to the major ports in the Eastern Kingdom, due to transport capacity, we are barely able to meet the daily demand for artillery shells. We are unable to bear the demand for large-caliber artillery shells. If Your Majesty has the ability to guarantee the daily consumption of 100,000 tons of artillery shells, I don't mind adding any type of artillery Your Majesty needs in the next shipment." Derek's neck was red as he angrily rebuked his king. Dwarves were like this. As long as they were in the right, they would fight to the end. Magni knew he was in the wrong and had nothing to say. He had been busy with God's Descent recently, and he really didn't know what the logistics situation was like. This was the inevitable drawback of modern warfare. Artillery had brought a whole new structure to Azeroth, which had always been dominated by cold weapons, stronger offensive and defensive capabilities. At the same time, it brought heavy pressure to the logistics. In the last battle of Mount Hyjal, because the route of retreat could be cut off at any time, it was more like a one-time deal. Supplies were done in one go. Anyway, the personnel and equipment were either dead or depleted, so there was no need to talk about supplies. It was different now. From the moment they settled in Xianxian Fortress, it was a tough defensive battle. The cost of destroying more than 1,000,000 big bugs was the daily consumption of more than 10,000 tons of artillery shells. Even if all the long-distance ships in the Alliance that could cross the endless sea were used, the average capacity was only a little more than 5,000 tons. Even if Duque had the foresight to put several production lines of small-caliber artillery shells in Theramore, and the task of food supply was assigned to Theramore, the Night Elves, and the Horde. Almost all the transport capacity was loaded with munitions, but it was still not enough. As the bridgehead of the Alliance, Duque couldn't put the most expensive and cutting-edge production line there. What if someone smashed it or stole it? She wouldn't even have a place to cry. Derek reminded his king, "Your Majesty, 90% of the munitions warehouses in Tanaris's hot sand port are full of rats." Magni frowned. 2 seconds later, the shameless dwarf king laughed and ran to the communication center. Duque, we're out of ammo. Can you conjure some bread like magic potions?" On the other side, in front of the magic communication mirror, Duque rolled his eyes. "Why don't you ask me to summon an army of 100 million and directly destroy Si Thun? If it's possible, it's not bad too." Magni was shameless. Duque really wanted to curse. "What do I need you for? But I just got a tiche and I'm in a good mood, so I won't argue with you. Where is the place with the most ammunition?" Magni turned his head and Derek immediately answered, "Menethil Port." Menethil Port was located in the Paladin Bay, north of Iron Furnace Castle. It was originally a garden-like port of Iron Furnace Castle, but it wasn't called that. In order to perfect the estuary of the dwarves' territory, Rotterdam almost exclusively helped the dwarves build this port. Hence, in order to commemorate the Menethil royal family, they named it that way. Now, the Alliance's industrial areas were mainly in the southern continent, and the specific functions were divided. According to the principle of proximity, Stormport was mostly used for transporting food and daily necessities, while the heavy industrial area was undoubtedly Iron Furnace Castle. Although in order to avoid being wiped out by the enemy, Iron Furnace Castle also transported a lot of munitions to Stormport through the underground railway of Stormwind City, and then loaded onto ships to be transported across the sea. Most of the munitions were still stored in Menethil Port. Faced with Magni's request, Duque scratched his head and finally nodded. "All right, I'll do it temporarily, but don't expect me to have free mana every day." With one order from above, the subordinates ran like crazy. In Xianxian Fortress, the Alliance army was in a complete mess. Move. There's an order from above, empty warehouses 1 to 10 in an hour. Originally, these warehouses were used to store ammunition. Now that there was a lack of ammunition, they were all filled with cannons and steam tanks that were either scrapped or waiting to be repaired. The group of dwarves blew their beards and stared, completely dumbfounded. There was only so much empty space in the relatively safe defensive circle of the fortress. Where were they supposed to move the things in such a short time? 1 hour. Not to mention tools, they couldn't even make it in time when there was a serious lack of steam cranes. Hence, a majestic scene appeared. A large group of dwarves either drove the deity's descent, or pulled the tribe's warriors over to be strong men. In Menethil Port, the dwarves were originally very lazy. Apart from the sentries and patrols, the dwarves were so bored that they were bragging. It couldn't be helped. The Alliance's ships were basically very accurate. When there were no ships, no matter how many munitions the Iron Furnace Castle transported, they could only be thrown into the warehouse at the port. Suddenly, the Alliance's lieutenants rushed into the barracks. Hurry. Alliance Commander Duke Marcus's direct order: prepare all the ammunition and large-caliber cannons stored in the warehouse within an hour. Bring them all to the square and wait for orders. The dwarves' quartermaster and logistics personnel were all dumbfounded. So much. How do we transport it? There are at least 300,000 tons of cannon ammunition here. And that's not counting the ones stuffed on the road. Where did the Alliance get these new fleets? How would I know? Maybe the Alliance's strongest mages are preparing to open a portal. This dwarf lieutenant's words were like a prophecy. Right. He guessed right. Duque was going to open a portal directly. After the tens of thousands of people below were exhausted, Duque didn't care so much. He just held up a tish and started working. Thinking back, this thing could only open a Karazhan portal and send people to Karazhan. Duke muttered to himself. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke would often use a tish to open a Karazhan teleportation portal beside the teleportation portal that the other mages had opened to return to Iron Stove Castle or Dalaran. Of course, as a good, pure, and lawful citizen, Duke knew that many of his party members were very talented in destroying the hearthstones that could teleport them home. He even put the two portals almost together. In the end, a bunch of people who didn't know the truth were bitterly sent to Karazhan in the wilderness just like that. It was purely a slip of my hand. You really can't blame me. No one would have thought that an evil priest could actually open a Karazhan portal. At that time Duke was scolded quite a bit, but Duke was very proud. He had one of the 1167 Atish in the entire national server. Chapter 1293. At the side, Alicia watched as Duque fell into a state of reminiscence and almost drooled wickedly. Even Alicia, who was most agreeable to Duque, could not help but facepalm. Please Duque, please pay attention to your image. If your image collapses it will affect us, alright? Sorry. Did not matter what he looked like. Wandering around without knowing how bad he looked was a capital offense. Duque's expression froze. He was that sanctimonious fake king again. Oh no, he was that handsome commander of the Alliance again. After advancing to Breaking Dawn, Duque rarely chanted magic. Whenever he needed to chant it would be a large-scale spell. The next moment, Duque's voice traversed space and time, echoing in the sky above Menethil Port and Cenarian Fortress at the same time. It seemed close yet far. The chanting was filled with ethereal inspiration, as if Duque's voice did not come from the other side of space, but from the divine domain. The incantation for the portal was a magic incantation that every Radiant Moon Archmage had to learn. After countless generations of cuts and improvements, it had become unchangeable. O lost soul wandering the world, may the stars give you guidance. May the earth bear your burden. In the name of Duke Marcus, I open a bridge that connects heaven and earth and turn the natural moat into a path. The incantation was the main point, but the series of spatial coordinates that appeared in his mind at the same time was the most important. For something like spatial teleportation, if one only needed to teleport between two places without any gap, then one only needed to remember the starting and destination coordinates. However, Azeroth was also a self-moving planet. To complete a continuous teleportation for a long period of time, one had to constantly change the spatial coordinates according to the planet's self-movement. Simply put, it required a series of absolutely correct spatial movement formulas. Any mistake would cause the teleporter to be beheaded at best, or disappear forever in a spatial rift in the worst. This was why teleportation often only happened between mages and major cities. Now what Duque wanted to complete was definitely a great spell that could be recorded in the annals of history. On Duque's retina, a huge amount of data poured down. The system elf's prompts kept coming. Spatial coordinates loaded. Calculation of spatial variable formula completed. The coordinates have been tested 233,333 times. The error rate is infinitely close to zero. Self-examination complete. Begin teleportation. Open portal 1 to 128. That's right, Duque was just that awesome. What he couldn't do in the past, Duque could now easily do with the help of the divine artifact Atish. Of course, with his limit, it would not be a problem for him to open 1024 portals at the same time. Considering the continuity and risk involved, Duque decided to be very safe and open 128 doors first. In the open space of Menethil Port, the dwarven logistics troops were all stunned as if they had seen a miracle. They stared at the desert world and the magnificent elven-style fortress on the other side of the portal, completely speechless. All of the dwarf's flattery and speech were stuck in his throat. What are you waiting for? Do not increase the burden on Commander Marcus. On the fortress side, the dwarf quartermaster Derek's angry voice finally woke up the dazed guys on the other side a little. The dwarves immediately shouted and began to hurriedly send the munitions boxes through the various portals along the makeshift conveyor belt. Be careful, idiots. Even if there is shock absorption equipment inside, if it accidentally explodes, it will blow us all up into the sky. The third team. First transport the 155mm ones. The cannons on the other side have priority in resupplying ammunition. Before starting, every field officer had given a death order to the lieutenant below. The lieutenant gave a death order to the non-commissioned officers. Most of them very cordially conveyed to their subordinates, such as, "The cannonballs that can't be transported will be stuffed into your mouth." So none of the dwarves dared to be lazy. In addition, Duque used a projection to mark the remaining time on each portal, which made every dwarf move more quickly. In the Cenarian fortress, the tribe was also shocked to the point of being completely speechless. Could such a large-scale teleportation really be done by mortals? Sal's body leaned slightly to the left, and a ghost-like shadow appeared beside him. The former Sun King, now the leader of the forgotten Anastrian. As a newly promoted tribal leader, Anastrian put his position in the right place, at least it looked like this. He covered his left chest with his right hand and bowed slightly. "I can't do it." At most 3 portals of the same level, each delivering 50 fully armed tribal warriors, is already the limit, and the consumption of magic gems is massive. If the Well of the Sun was still in my hands, then it would be 10 portals at most. Wajin asked in a low voice, "Aren't you all Breaking Dawn archmages?" Anastrian's mouth was bitter. "In terms of rank, I'm not much different from Duke Marcus. But his talent in the field of multicasting is above me. The key is that my thieves saw that he inherited the divine staff of the previous guardian, Mediv. The legendary astral staff that can break through space. Atish, the legendary staff of the guardian?" Sal muttered to himself, and the bitterness in his voice became even stronger. Although he didn't know what price Duque had to pay for such a large-scale teleportation, it wouldn't be too light, but it definitely wouldn't be too heavy, otherwise no one would be able to afford it. Even so, the Alliance's epic-making supply method had already made the Horde look up to it. If it was just the flying warships, the Horde still had a chance to imitate and catch up, but the flying fortresses and large-scale teleportation made Sal completely despair. This was already something that had nothing to do with the technology tree or talent. Unless the tribe was lucky enough to dig up another floating fortress left behind by the Titans and get their hands on a space staff that was close to Atish's. Not to mention that they had complete trust in Anastrian and were not afraid of her betrayal. Damn, there were so many ifs, and if they could all be done, it would be a miracle among miracles. The reason why miracles were called miracles was because they were basically impossible to happen. Sal's heart was heavy. In fact, this was Sal thinking too much. In the original history, during the period of the King of Draenor, the Alliance and the Horde jointly attacked Draenor, which did not explode. It was in the Moon Shadow Valley that the Alliance quickly built a huge fortress almost from nothing. What did they rely on? It was by relying on the portal. A large number of soldiers and craftsmen came from the huge portal. Materials such as wood and stones were locally obtained, but craftsmen and key alloy parts were all transported from the major cities of the Alliance across planets. In that era, cross-space supplies and strikes had long since become commonplace. It was just that Duque had realized it earlier. As for the Horde's strong minds suffering 100,000 points of critical damage, Duque said he would not take the blame for this. Chapter 1294. The Dalajan could also fly, but the Dalajan was the capital of a country. It wouldn't be good if it was damaged on the front lines. If the mage towers in the outer perimeter were to be destroyed, the Novice Mage Training Institute in the center would be damaged. Forget about whether Luo Ning, who had died somewhere, would be furious when he returned. Duke would definitely be heartbroken. Right now, Dalaran was his backyard and a training ground for talents. So whether it was attacking or defending, Naxxramas had to go first. As the strongest defensive fortress in the Alliance, if it didn't have tens of thousands of cannons, how could it satisfy the vanity of Duke, who was a proponent of cannons and ships? But it wasn't easy to rebuild the flying stronghold. If there was anyone to blame, it was Duque's fault for tormenting Naxxramas too thoroughly. First he let the Dalajan give it a shot, then it fell from the sky into Karaj, where the bugs almost tore it apart. In the end, Duque gave up a few areas in order to clean it up. Naxxramas was now empty inside. Many places were hollow, and who knew how long it would take to rebuild. But the Alliance didn't have the time to do this. Duque could only use the system to calculate the balance and install cannons on the stronghold first. Balance was very important. Whether it was a ship or a plane, it had to be calculated before departure. Otherwise it would overturn. With the plague area almost completely destroyed, the weight of the cannons was a huge project. Fortunately, Duque had the system elf to help him calculate. It took a full 3 days for the dwarven craftsman to work overtime, almost without sleep, to help Naxxramas install about 2,000 cannons and prepare about 50,000 tons of shells. Although 50,000 tons was a lot before industrialization, the dwarven things were all thick and hard. It wasn't much to use. But it's enough for now, Duque concluded. In the command hall of Naxxramas, there was a sudden uproar. When do we attack? The one who asked was Lord Rorgrom. For the brave orcs, they had only been defending and not attacking for a while. Moreover, the few huge bug nests in the Silithus region were the biggest scourge. As long as the worm nest was not destroyed, the worm queen inside would be able to continuously produce a large number of large worms and cause trouble everywhere. These destructive bugs or bugmen were absolutely terrifying. They didn't mind meat or vegetables, and anything that could be called a living creature could be their food. The vultures in the sky, the scorpions and snakes in the desert, and even the cacti could be their prey. Just like that, the queen of the swarm unscrupulously replenished her nutrients, and then gave birth to 4-digit eggs every day. In less than 10 days, a new batch of giant insects would emerge from their cocoons and continue to wreak havoc everywhere. Therefore, destroying the hive was imperative. Faced with Master Howl's question, Duque pondered for a moment and said, "The day after tomorrow. I'll greet the dragons first." Duque didn't notice, or perhaps Duque intentionally or unintentionally saw a pair of eyes filled with hatred because of the words, "the day after tomorrow." Compared to the tribes whose homes had been destroyed, there was a leader of the alliance who hated these worms even more. But ever since he arrived at Cenarian Fortress, nothing was up to him. Yes. He was Fandral Staghelm. Having lost his son, he was eager to attack the swarm, but Tyrant held him down tightly, forbidding him and his elite druid troops from leaving the fortress to attack before the main force returned. In the end, he even hated Duque. Now that Duque was attacking from the rear in order to reorganize, it made him grit his teeth even more. But Duque ignored him. He let Magni discuss the deployment of troops with Thrall, while he used the compass to find Alexstrasza. Your Highness, are you worried about the big trash in the void? The remains of the burning legion's warships. The Red Dragon Queen's eyes lit up in the magic mirror. The continuous battle in the void had caused great losses to both sides. The dragons dead had their companions collect their corpses and send them back to Dragonbone Waste to be buried. But the large number of space warships used by demons became a headache. If it was the corpses of demons, the dragons could use their powerful bodies to ram through them, but the harder and larger wreckages could not. And as the number of wreckages increased, the dragon's ability to find enemies decreased. Alexstrasza's interest was piqued when Duque suddenly mentioned the big trash. What good suggestion do you have? Let's hear it. No one knew what Duque discussed with the queen. Anyway, the day of the army's deployment was fast approaching. Door of Darkness 22, March 18th, 8 a.m. Uncharacteristically, Duque wasn't in charge of the Alliance's main attack this time. The commander-in-chief was Magni, the cannon maniac, while Thrall and Tyrande were in charge. Outsiders might not understand, but those familiar with the Alliance knew that under Duque's guidance, the Alliance had long since abandoned the medieval style of warfare. Now, as long as the conditions allowed it, they would use their cannons to bombard everything that could move within their field of vision. Now, today was a little more special. Standing on the platform that Naxxramas had specially opened up, looking down at the ground 3,000 meters above the ground, it was a strange feeling. This height had long surpassed the height that flying insects could climb. What was a beating up? This was a beating up. Thrall's eyes narrowed. He could already see the outcome of this battle. This was like using cannons to fight primitive people. It was just that unreasonable. All right. Your Excellency Tyrande Whisperwind, since Duque has left the opening to you, my little fellows and I will watch the show first. Magni gave up the main position. Thank you, Your Majesty Bronzebeard. Tyrande didn't stand on ceremony and stood in the middle. Time was up. Tyrande raised her head slightly. Her clear eyes seemed to emit 2 sharp rays of divine light. It pierced through space, through the clouds, and looked straight into space. A second later, Tyron's long green hair suddenly started to flutter even though there was no wind. She only wore a golden bracelet and her well-developed arms were raised high, revealing the beautiful lines of her muscles. She focused all of her attention as if she was searching for something and guiding something. She shone brightly, and under Elun's divine power, the clear sky suddenly darkened. The sun and clouds seemed to have disappeared, and everyone could suddenly see the stars in the sky. Above the atmosphere, a void battleship that had been broken for who knew how many years was being pulled by several ancient dragons was changing its orbit, falling from the planet's synchronous orbit into the designated route. Soon, in the pitch-black void, a long line of fire lit up the entire defense area of the dragon aspect. Even in the midst of patrolling, the soaring dragons still turned their necks to look at that bright red. Chapter 1295. Rumble. The entire atmosphere rumbled. Even if the officers repeatedly warned the soldiers below, even if these soldiers were not new recruits, after seeing this scene and listening to the terrifying sound in the sky, the soldiers were still restless. In the sky above Silithus, a bright line of fire suddenly appeared from the sky. When the line of fire was imprinted in Thrall's resolute eyes, no one could see Thrall's expression. He still held the semi-divine weapon, Hammer of Destruction, tightly, but this famous weapon seemed to be not worth mentioning in the face of the terrifying attack that was about to happen. Thrall seemed to be in deep thought, and his green face seemed to be much paler than before. The golden light descended from the sky and was reflected in the deepest part of the eyes of every Alliance soldier. It seemed to be a long parabola drawn from the distant realm of the gods. Under the continuous gestures of the elven high priest, it turned into a stream of light from far to near. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads so that their eyes could follow the light. The golden light left a long afterimage in their field of vision, and it hit the ash insect nest directly north of Cenarian Fortress. It exploded with a loud bang, like a dazzling flower blooming with golden flames. It was 50 stories tall and it looked like a gigantic insect tower made of solid rubber, but it collapsed with a single strike. Not only that, the entire insect nest couldn't withstand this sky-high attack at all, and there were signs of subsidence. The insect army guarding the insect nest was lifted up by the huge flame shock wave, thrown away, and dismembered into countless pieces, finally falling like raindrops. Within a diameter of a kilometer, it was full of flames, and the smoke and dust even swept up to 5,000 meters away. Wow! Magni whistled loudly. At the same time, almost all the Alliance soldiers on the cannons and portholes of the fortress who witnessed this scene let out fiery cheers. Ha ha ha! Good job! Burn these dog bugs! Burn, burn, burn! Burn them all! Although they didn't suffer many losses in the past few days, they were surrounded and attacked by dozens of insects, and their defense line was broken from time to time. Now, seeing one of the leaders of the Alliance, Tyrant, use such a powerful starfall, every soldier couldn't help but be excited. Who didn't want to have a powerful boss? Who didn't want their boss to stand up bravely at a critical moment, break the balance and win? Unknowingly, every night elf looked at Tyrant with eyes full of worship. Hey, it's not like Tyrant can use such a powerful starfall. Fandral Staghelm gritted his teeth. He was right. Of course, Tyrant didn't have the divine power to summon such a large meteorite fragment. This was the wreckage of the void warship that Duke had the Dragon Clan drop at the designated time and place after he had calculated the angle of incidence with the system. Since it was a fragment, its irregular shape would naturally cause all sorts of accidents when passing through the atmosphere. But that wasn't important. Tyrant, who was used to starfall, even with Elun's help, even if she didn't have the power to pull such a large floating object out of its orbit, she could still use Elun's divine power to guide the target to where she wanted it to go. This was an incomparably accurate strike. Of course, the higher-ups wouldn't tell the people below what was going on. The night elves knelt on the spot, all prostrating themselves to Tyrant, the incarnation of goddess Elun. In their eyes, this was a miracle that Elun had personally performed. In terms of power, this was indeed a miracle. One more wave, and the divine power that the goddess has bestowed upon me will be used up. After that, I will need to rest for at least a week. Following Duque's plan, Tyrant lied without batting an eyelid. In fact, this wasn't just to guard against the horde, it was also to guard against possible spies in the Alliance army. Also, clusters of starlight continued to rise from Tyron's body into the sky. As if responding to her twinkling starlight, a golden curtain of light slowly descended from the sky. It was like countless small suns that had fallen into the mortal realm. It was accompanied by Tyron's melodious and mysterious incantation. They arrived in the blink of an eye. Like a rainstorm in May, they landed within the range of the ashworm nest. Rumble. Under the acceleration of gravity, the warship fragments became the most terrifying weapons of destruction. They tore through the sky and crashed into the worm nest with terrifying kinetic energy that no one in this era could understand. Not only did they cause the most terrifying massacre, but they also caused earth-shattering destruction. With the naked eye, everyone could see that the entire worm nest was collapsing. It wasn't just 1.5 meters, but a huge hole that was as high as a 10-story building. Finally, Starfall was over. Tyrande collapsed as if she had lost all her strength. Tyrande. Sasha, who was beside her, reacted quickly and caught her. She really did collapse. However, only she, Duque and Elune knew that this was far from her limit. She didn't use Elune's power to replenish her stamina. Good work. Now it's time for the dwarves to perform. Magni bowed slightly, then stood on the main seat and shouted, "Kids, use the white phosphorus bombs, incendiary bombs and heavy oil bombs." 2 minutes later, the rumbling of cannons could be heard throughout the flying fortress. The ashworm lair was already on fire. After all, the falling meteors weren't real fire elemental attacks. Now that they had enough ammunition, the dwarves turned the entire worm nest into a sea of fire. Speaking of which, if these things were used on humans, it would definitely be insane. For example, if the white phosphorus bombs burned a person, they could burn through the skin all the way to the bones. It felt like it was comparable to the skinning spells of the Calamity Army. If it was used on insects, who cares if they die? Only dead insects are good insects. Understand? The furious cannons continued for a full hour. After firing off over 10,000 tons of cannons, the beastmen were already numb to the sound of shells retracting, not to mention the continuous sound of cannons. Fortunately, they had given out earplugs early on. Otherwise, all of them would have become deaf. Until noon, when the Alliance and Horde mages used large-scale magic formations to cast war-level spells and extinguish the fire with frost, it was finally the infantry's turn. Go. We need to find the queen of the worm nest. We just want her corpse. The infantry of the allied army, who had been holding back for so long, finally had a use. Chapter 1296. Where was Duque when the Alliance army was in full swing? Duque quietly went to Lordaeron and then returned to Karazhan. At the highest level of Karazhan, which was also the most central position of this unique space, the decorations left by the previous master, Medivh, had been replaced. Duque sat on a throne condensed from arcane energy. The throne behind him was like the roots of a tree. Arcane energy, like electricity, connected every room in Karazhan, as if it was sucking magic from every corner of the entire mage tower. Under Duque's feet was like a huge piece of transparent glass. He could see the hundreds of libraries below, which were filled with millions of magic books. Duque sitting here was more like an extension of the magic knowledge, except that he happened to be sitting on the spire that symbolized supreme knowledge. Unlike the dominance and arrogance of other kings, Duque was filled with a kind of majesty that symbolized mysterious power. He was motionless like a statue. His deep gaze crossed time and space, staring at every corner of the mage tower. The Einherjar guarding the entrance of the gate. The Einherjar attendants preparing to welcome guests in the arched hall that towered like the sky. The Saintess of Chastity waiting for the enemy at the end of the arcade. The curator who was vigilant in the library. The depths of Duque's eyes were like the well of eternity that constantly produced magic, or like the endless sea that could condense terrifying whirlpools. The spiral-shaped magic waves made him even more mysterious. Under the throne, several beings of different shapes and forms expressed their respect in their own ways. Majordomo Executus, the fire demon manager from the Molten Core, put his right claw on his left chest and bowed slightly. Opposite him, the frost elemental dragon, Saffron, who had just been redeemed by Duque from Naxxramas, bowed its noble head. Farina, the black witch who exuded a shadow aura, wore a white gauze evening dress. It seemed that she didn't want to give Duque a bad impression. This white gauze dress was quite conservative with a high neckline and nothing revealing on the chest or back. She stood there in the most ladylike posture. If it was in the past she might have had some unnecessary thoughts, but ever since she had the existence of the person standing opposite her, she didn't have any other thoughts. She couldn't think of anything. That's right. That person was an existence that everyone in the human kingdom knew about. The former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. If he had a choice, Duque did not want to disturb this great saint's rest. But Duque had no choice but to do this because he only had shadow. Without the holy elemental emissary he would most likely be finished. Originally, Alonso's would not be able to rest in peace. During the Scourge invasion the plague infected the lands of Lordaeron. From Alonso's Fail's grave, a mindless zombie was born. At first it was just an accident. Even the generals of the Scourge didn't realize that there was such a guy in the Scourge. However, as time went by, Alonso's regained his consciousness. He hid and searched for the survivors of the Rotterdam kingdom. Kalia Menethil, the last living member of the Rotterdam royal family, was found and protected by Fail. He also established a secret sect to observe the situation of the war in Azeroth, and even recruited members from the Forsaken. For a long time Kalia and Fail hid in Lordaeron. Until Willan, who was one of the 3 leaders of Eredar along with Kil, Jaden and Archimonde, came to Azeroth after rejecting Sardra's corruption. The 2 leaders of the Holy Light hit it off, and they formed a secret alliance to prepare for the future war between the Light and Dark factions. In this life, Lordaeron was recovered and Alonso's grave, which Duque had been protecting, was not destroyed. Duque was able to summon Alonso's soul. If there is a shadow there must be light. Otherwise it will only gradually sink and fall. I hope that you can continue to guide me and continue to fight for the future of Azeroth. When Duque made this request, Alonso's Fail agreed to become Duque's Holy Light elemental emissary without hesitation. At this moment, looking at the Archbishop of Holy Light standing in front of her with a gentle and amiable smile, Farina felt as if she had been scolded by a dog. She had a premonition that if she dared to mess around she would definitely have a hard time in the future. With a top-notch holy soul, Alonso's talent was unquestionable. However, there were too many existences with shadow souls. Even if Alonso's couldn't be replaced, Farina could be replaced at any time. Farina felt like crying. Next to Alonso's was the Redemption Knight Thaddeus, who had reverted to the appearance of a paladin. He no longer appeared in the form of a monster. His soul looked like that of a paladin, but instead of bursting out with crackling lightning he was a natural element thunder knight. Unknowingly, Duque had gathered 5 elemental emissaries. However, everyone knew that there was at least one more. As a priest, holy and shadow were necessary. Similarly, as a mage, once they had fire and frost, all that was left was arcane magic. It was not easy to find a special soul that could contain powerful arcane magic and treat arcane magic as a life form. For a while, Farina sometimes thought maliciously that Ronan's disappearance was fake, and that Duque had actually killed Ronan and made him an elemental emissary. Fortunately, the Black Witch did not dare to say this out loud. Otherwise, Duque would definitely serve her with leather whips and candles. Cough cough torture. Fortunately, Duque had obtained such a powerful arcane magic soul almost at the beginning of Duque's rise to fame. The door of the hall opened with a loud bang. Under the gaze of the 12 Einherjar guards, a soul mage slowly walked in. Walking on the bright red carpet, his appearance could not be considered heroic, but he had a dignified air of a scholar. He wore a hood-like, Mind Union headgear, and a dark blue Edwards will, that complemented the complex elvish style. In his left hand was a red prismatic crystal, and in his right hand was a Inazresm soul blade, that looked like a cluster of flames. On his back was a fiery red secret ruby cloak, that fluttered in the wind, and the ring of Grim Storm on his finger was shining. This gorgeous mage equipment was comparable to that of the main force of the Alliance's hero squad. In the original history he would have been the one to shine brilliantly. Unfortunately, in this life he was unlucky and was killed by Sardras. But that was not important. After managing Karazhan for Duque for more than 20 years, he finally stepped onto the glorious stage of Azeroth. Yes. His name was Khadgar. Chapter 1297. Khadgar was supposed to be the third great mage who could destroy the heavens and the earth. In history he would often single-handedly blow up bridges, block dams, and cause chaos to the iron horde that was created by the brainless roar that ran away. Looking at Khadgar's translucent face, which was still young because of his early death, Duque felt a little guilty. But this was fate. If not for Duque, perhaps he would still be as powerful as he was in history. Since Duque had taken over his fate and done better than him, Khadgar could only do so. If not for Duque needing an arcane elemental emissary to break through to the demigod level, Khadgar would probably still be a pitiful earthbound spirit in Karazhan. Managing the library and fighting the occasional invading monsters. This was Khadgar's unchanging life. His translucent spirit body was clad in solid cloth armor, and he did look a little out of place. Soon this would not be a problem. Lightly putting down the magic weapon in his hand, Khadgar pressed his hands to the ground and made a standard bow. Great Archmage, my lord Duke Marcus. Your loyal servant Khadgar has come to pay his respects. The once young mage's voice was now filled with indescribable excitement. He had been dead for too long, so long that he had almost forgotten how it felt to be alive. This did not mean that he did not want to be resurrected. Not in the form of a filthy undead, but as some kind of life, to truly reappear in the world just like his master Medivh. Resurrection was the privilege of the gods. One had to at least step into the demigod level to have the right to discuss this issue. Now in front of him was a chance to become Duque's elemental emissary and become an elemental creature, just like Batdius and Alonso's. Sitting on the throne, listening to Khadgar's sincere greeting, Duque felt a strange sense of absent-mindedness. He felt as if he and Khadgar had been reversed. If Khadgar had not died, or if he, Duque, had been more capable 20 years ago and had discovered a cultivation method specifically for ghosts, would Khadgar have had a better life? Fine. There was no point in making assumptions. Duque sighed softly. Since it was already like this in this life, there was no need for him to feel ashamed. I've never seen such a shameless person before. Yes, I've seen it today. Duque then put on a serious face and slightly raised his chin. Khadgar. How many years have you served me in the form of a heroic spirit? Khadgar lowered his head deeply. It has been 22 years, my lord. All this time, I have been doing my best to fulfill the duties of a servant and help you protect Karazhan. Duque raised his right hand and a pair of arcane palms appeared out of thin air, helping Karthika up. Khadgar stood up, still maintaining his slightly bowed posture. Very good. I can see how loyal you are. I've always felt sorry for your tragic fate. Duque cleared his throat and continued. I've always believed that the reason why people are noble is because they have the desire for knowledge, the desire to explore and the courage to fight against fate. Tell me, Khadgar, are you willing to be a ghost mage forever? Khadgar took a deep breath, even though this action was meaningless to a ghost. If this is your will, my lord, I will accept it. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. Unknowingly, Khadgar had already learned so many ways to speak. Back then he had still been a hothead. Perhaps this was what growth was like. Age and circumstances would always smooth out one's edges. Right now, I have a better and more dangerous choice for you. You can choose to become my arcane elemental emissary and help me control the power of the arcane domain. But the price is that from the moment you agree, you will become a special life form attached to me. If I die or fail to become a demigod, you will be like me, soul. Fly. Soul. Disperse. Do you understand what I've said? Faced with Duque's question, Khadgar nodded again and said solemnly, very clearly. That's right, if he maintained his current state, Duque would definitely let him continue to be the administrator of Karazhan. But so what? With Duque's immortal state, unless Duque died in battle, waiting for the next ruler of Karazhan was something that would never happen. If Khadgar could not even grasp this opportunity and did not have the courage to do so, how could he rise in the future? Without even half a second of hesitation, Khadgar raised his head and said in a clear voice, if this is the choice you give me, my lord, then I will choose to fight with all my strength. I hope to become a higher and stronger life form and help you, my lord. A smile blossomed on Duque's face. Very good. This is the Khadgar I know, the one who never lacks wisdom and dares to challenge himself. Duque stood up and slowly walked down the stairs made of the purest arcane energy. He raised his right hand, his palm facing Khadgar's forehead. Khadgar, what I am about to do is different from the other elemental emissaries. You know that. Arcane magic is the most basic and important core of the three elements of a mage. Thus, I will modify your soul so that your new form will be completely connected to my magic circuit. Your soul will be an extension of my magic circuit, and you will become the core commander of the other elemental emissaries. I'm not afraid to tell you that this process will be very painful. In a sense, to use an inaccurate analogy, if Duke was a complete iPhone and smartphone, then an ordinary elemental emissary would most likely become an existence equivalent to a power bank in normal times. They would help Duque communicate with the elemental realm, absorbing and filtering more elemental energy for Duque to use. However, Khadgar would become Duke's auxiliary chip, RAM and power bank, a special existence that combined all of these functions into one. He would be able to use magic to attack enemies for Duque, but he would also be like a command tower. Duque would even give Khadgar a portion of the System Elf's computing power. Because recently the System Elf had finally reached its limit. When calculating the trajectory of the warship wreckage in the atmosphere, Duque felt a wave of fatigue. Faced with Duque's physique, Khadgar's reply was resolute. I can endure it. Indeed, only someone as talented as Khadgar would be able to withstand this pressure. Then let's begin. Duque's palm lightly pressed against Khadgar's forehead. As his palm felt a slight chill, a large amount of magical information began to rush into Khadgar's sea of consciousness. Ugh! Khadgar let out a muffled groan. Chapter 1298. Everything in the world had to be done step by step, and Karthika didn't have extraordinary talent from the very beginning, directly becoming the world-destroying great master of true virtue. In history, Khadgar had inherited Mediva's legacy and spent more than 20 years to become a true powerhouse. In this life, Khadgar had died when he was still weak. Even though Duque had made him a heroic spirit mage after his death and had given him the right to read all of Karazhan's libraries, as well as the right to absorb other souls to strengthen himself, he had still lacked experience. That kind of life-and-death experience. Truthfully speaking, only a soul that had withstood all sorts of trials and tribulations and truly matured would have the soul strength that Duque needed for the elemental emissary core. The moment he touched Khadgar's soul, Duque knew that he was disappointed. Not enough. Far from enough. Khadgar's soul strength was barely on the level of a radiant moon mage. In the Alliance he was only slightly better than mages like Gina Goldsword, and he couldn't even compare to Astromancer Solarian who had joined Duque's side. The arcane energy that Duque had poured into Khadgar's body quickly reached saturation. It wasn't that Duque didn't want to pour it in but that he couldn't. Even if Duque created new magic circuits for Khadgar on the spot, Khadgar's soul wouldn't be able to withstand these circuits. Duque's eyelids twitched violently. The problem now lay in front of Duque. Should he give up or find a new path? Khadgar's entire body trembled violently. He was very clear about the state of his soul. At this moment, Duque had almost stopped pouring mana into him. Compared to Duque's boundless, ocean-like mana, Khadgar's capacity was far too small. Master, have I disappointed you? No, I should say that I was too impatient for success. Then Duque let go of his hand and fell into a long silence. Using the elemental emissary to help him share the burden of becoming a demigod by relying on multiple elemental domains seemed to be stuck. Everything must be divided into primary and secondary. Without a core there would be no branches. As the foundation of magic, the existence of the Arcana School was absolutely necessary. Similarly, the Arcana School's elemental envoys were also necessary. Duque repeatedly searched through his mind. Apart from Khadgar, Duque could not think of anyone else who could become an Arcana Technique elemental core. Arcana techniques were the foundation and the most versatile of them all. A brainless and untalented fellow would never be able to shoulder such a heavy responsibility. The air was silent. Suddenly Khadgar moved. He slowly knelt down. His movements seemed to be in slow motion and every detail was filled with reverence. My lord, I feel that the limits of my soul shouldn't stop here. I think I should have a greater possibility. If you have any other methods, Master, I am willing to give it a try. Even if my soul is annihilated, I will not hesitate. Khadgar gritted his teeth, a resolute expression on his face. It was almost the expression of a martyr. The surrounding elemental emissaries originally had the mentality of watching the ceremony, but at this moment, their expressions completely changed. There were no whispers, no whispers. The air was filled with a fanatical and focused aura. Duque took a deep breath and raised his head. After muttering to himself for a few seconds, he lowered his head and looked at Khadgar. Khadgar, did you know? I once traveled through time and space and went to the ancient war 10,000 years ago. I've heard of it. At that time I borrowed the power of the Time King Nozdormu to peek into Azeroth's past and future. At the same time I also saw you in a different timeline. Being able to reverse the flow of time and enter a different parallel space sounded like a fantasy. As a pursuer of magic, an explorer of the source of magic, and an official disciple of the Mediv, Khadgar's understanding of time and space far surpassed that of others. Suddenly, Khadgar smiled bitterly, and an expression appeared on his face as if he was about to cry. Is the Khadgar in a different timeline more useful than me? Not just useful but incomparably glorious. This will be a long story. Are you willing to listen? Khadgar. Khadgar nodded solemnly. Together. Since the beginning of the Dark Portal. Duque's voice became ethereal and illusory. At the same time a thought wave entered Khadgar's soul. This was a video created by the system Elf using a full 3D image. After it was slightly blurred, it felt exactly the same as when Duque peeked into the river of time. Khadgar was deeply immersed in this seemingly illusory image that was connected to his fate. It was as if another part of his life had been highly condensed, and Khadgar was soon unable to differentiate which part was his true memories, and which part was what Duque had shown him, which part was his fate in the other world of balance. No, it was not just a look. Khadgar was completely immersed in it. He could clearly understand why he had made this decision. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, what kind of emotions and thoughts did he have to make each and every decision? In this world without Duke Marcus. That's right. Everything had changed. In that world it was Khadgar, Garona, and Lothar who had raided Karazhan. It was also him who had unfortunately been hit by Mediva's spell, causing him to have white hair and wrinkled skin at a young age. It was also him who had killed Sardras. Unfortunately, from that moment on he had also become the murderer of his teacher, the savior of a nameless world. He remembered every detail of his immersion in the study of portal magic. He clearly remembered that the dark portal had opened again, and the orcs had begun to attack the watchtower. How the orcs had used simple weapons to destroy the human infantrymen, smashing their helmets to death and cutting off their shields and arms. He also, personally, decided that in order to completely stop Nizul's evil plan, he would lead a coalition of humans, dwarves and elves together with Turalian, Daneth Trollbane, Aurelia, and Kudrin on an expedition to the Draenor world in an attempt to hunt down Nizul. In the end, in the final battle of Draenor, Ricard ushered in that fateful explosion. He could still remember that his mouth was wide open and he screamed silently. But he had to do everything he could to stop this terrifying explosion. Such a huge amount of energy. It was like a spreading flame on the plains, running wildly through his body, burning his magic circuits, and making it almost unbearable for his senses. Then everything returned to silence. Soon he turned from a participant to a third-person spectator. He, Khadgar, was regarded as one of the 5 heroes of the Dark Portal, and a statue was erected in the King's Valley in Stormwind City. I am a hero. Chapter 1299. A piece of history that seemed to come from another world stirred up all of Khadgar's memories that had been sealed away for a long time. In the past he had many dreams as a youth. He dreamed of being a great hero who saved the world, dreamed of becoming the greatest mage and left his name in history. His parents had sent him to the Dalajan to receive training, and this was what they had taught him. When his innate talent had been activated and he had become a disciple of Mediv, this was also what he had longed for. Goals were different from dreams. Goals could be achieved through hard work and time. But dreams were loftier and more distant. All of a sudden he was told that in the other world of Azeroth he was a hero. All of a sudden, all of his dreams, all of his vanity, and even the occasional hollow feeling in his chest were filled in an instant. The feelings that had been dormant in his soul for a long time seemed to have been awakened. So, I can also be this strong and I can be so worshipped. This feeling was truly wonderful, but in the next moment, Khadgar was startled awake. Was this hero still him? Did the things that happened in the parallel world have anything to do with the main timeline that he was currently in? Khadgar's head suddenly jerked backwards and his entire body arched backwards. Perhaps in that world he was like the main character in all the legends of heroes, the gathering point of the world. But it was precisely this feeling of reality that brought him a new and dangerous experience that made him feel a little unreal. As Duque's thoughts stopped, Khadgar found that his senses had returned to normal. He panted heavily. This was a habit of his. Spirit bodies did not need to breathe. Khadgar began to carefully distinguish between what was real and what was not. Duque did not say anything, nor did he try to remind or force Khadgar to do anything. In Duque's imagination, not many people would be able to withstand such an impact. In particular, the psychological difference was too great. How many people would be able to withstand suddenly knowing that they could actually be amazing after living such a terrible life for 20 years? From Duque's perspective, this was like opening Pandora's box. Could release many terrifying things such as the most negative emotions. But don't forget that the final item in Pandora's box was hope. Therefore, Duque wanted to take a gamble no matter what. He wanted to see if Khadgar, the most powerful great mage in history, lived up to his reputation. It had nothing to do with one's ability to comprehend magic. There were too many talented people in this world, but how many of them could become successful in the end? Apart from talent, success depended more on willpower. Khadgar's willpower had always been strong. Hoo. Khadgar panted heavily. Can I see it again? In fact, can I see my future self in that world? Sure. Duque replied calmly as he once again sent over the image created by the system elf. Khadgar closed his eyes and slowly relaxed his senses, allowing the large number of images that invaded his sea of consciousness to gradually calm down, until it became as smooth as watching a movie. Scene after scene flashed before his eyes. Khadgar was once again immersed in that virtual me from another world. In that real illusory world, he opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Now he was standing in a memory that belonged only to him. He was standing in a small world with himself as the center. His body was surging with the energy of that world, and what he felt was something that he could not have felt in his 20 years as a soul. This was very fresh and very heavy, and it allowed him to see things that he could not have seen before. That's right. In that world he was the hero. He was the leader. At the same time he had to bear many things that he did not need to bear in the main storyline world. Choice. Almost every choice of a high-ranking person was accompanied by pain and sacrifice. There was nothing that could be achieved without paying a price, and there was no war that did not involve death. In this world he had been a miserable low-ranked mage when he was alive. After choosing to preserve his soul, he only needed to fulfill his duty as a steward. He could push all the dangers to Duque and be his own librarian, roaming in the sea of books and immersing himself in magic experiments. In that parallel world he was the most important magic consultant of the Alliance, as well as an important leader of the Alliance. Every speculation and decision regarding the realm of mystery was incomparably heavy. It had to be said that Khadgar's heart was in a mess and he was even feeling bitter. But at this time Khadgar saw something else. It was something that Duque had intentionally or unintentionally let him see. Sometimes without comparison there would be no harm. Khadgar saw that under Duque's leadership, the first and second dark portal ended in 2 years. In his own world it had taken 6 years. In this world, Duque had vigorously developed technology and economy, turning the tide many times. In the field of conventional warfare, the Alliance had almost completely suppressed the enemy. On his side, the Lordaeron kingdom had been destroyed, and there was also Alterac Rapids Castle Kuel Salis. Almost all of Lordaeron had been destroyed. Then Gloom City had risen and the Sin Dorii kingdom had sided with the Horde. Only when they were placed side by side could Khadgar truly understand just how great the difference between the two worlds was. Khadgar was in a mess and his mind seemed to have turned to mush. He did not realize that while his thoughts were in chaos, The other 5 elemental emissaries were watching in shock as Khadgar's soul strength increased exponentially. This is. Thaddeus' face was filled with disbelief. Only a soul that has been tested is the strongest soul. Alonso sighed. Duque did not disturb Khadgar. Dooku was throwing caution to the wind, completely throwing caution to the wind. He really did not know how telling Khadgar the truth would affect this steward of Karazhan, who had loyally watched over him for 22 years. He could only gamble. Huff huff huff. Khadgar's breathing became rapid. Finally, after 2 minutes he seemed to have calmed down. Duque asked in a low voice, Khadgar, is it a pity? Is it resentment? Perhaps the original you could have done better. Khadgar raised his head and smiled. As expected, the work of a bronze dragon is difficult for humans to accept. When I saw how valiant I was in the other world, I was a bit confused as to which one was the real me. Duque said, have you thought it through? I have. The me in this world is me, and the me in the other world is also me. Since the me in the other world can do it, I think I can do it well in my own world. At this point, Khadgar revealed a mysterious smile. I know what you are worried about, my lord. I want to say that your worries are unnecessary. Unnecessary. Just like how you had countless chances to become the emperor but you gave up on it. My reason is similar. The world is about to be destroyed by demons, so I don't care who is going to be the hero. Chapter 1300. Duque was at a loss for words. As expected, different people had different ways of thinking. In essence, Duque was selfish. In his heart he always had a priority list. First he had to protect himself, then his harem, then his friends and family. On this basis, Duque did not mind being a hero and saving his country and the world. But a true hero would first be the world, then the country, and finally the individual. No one was born great, but those with noble bloodlines could also fall into the deepest darkness. No matter what kind of education or circumstances a person received to have such a grand idea and then put it into action, they should be praised and praised. Yes. Even if the sky collapsed, the tall one would hold it up. If no one was willing to be the tall hero, then when the sky finally collapsed, the short one would not be able to survive either. Everyone understood this logic, but how many could actually do it? Obviously, Khadgar was one of them. In this life, Duque seemed to have absorbed Khadgar's fate, shouldering many responsibilities that should have been Khadgar's, completing even greater feats than Khadgar himself. From the bottom of his heart, Duque still felt a little guilty. The human heart was very complicated. It was true that Duque could continue to cheat others and trick Khadgar into becoming his magic battery after he improved himself. But what about in the future? Thus, before things got worse, Duque used the parallel world method to improve Khadgar, which was actually a way to save his own soul. Unexpectedly, Khadgar laughed and said, the world is about to be destroyed by demons. I don't care who's going to be the hero. These words seemed crude but were actually filled with philosophy. Duque's heart was relieved. So this is the so-called gauging the heart of a gentleman with one's own yardstick? Suddenly he laughed bitterly. Speaking of which, this method of infusing illusions was actually displaying different fates and tempering other people's souls, and it was really effective. Let alone Duque, even the other 5 elemental emissaries could feel the strength of Khadgar's soul. To be honest, before this, Dark Witch Farina had looked down on Khadgar. She could not imagine why Duque would choose such a weak soul to be the core of his 6 elements. Who would have thought that a miracle that seemed to happen frequently but was actually impossible to replicate had happened? Originally, Khadgar's soul power was the lowest among the 6 elemental emissaries, but he had quickly become the strongest among them. This made Farina extremely envious. She stepped out of the ranks, bowed slightly, and placed her right hand on her left chest. However, her fair arm was sandwiched between 2 Mount Hyjal, which made her look more alluring. My lord, what I did to Khadgar just now, can I try it on me as well? If the elemental emissary is powerful, won't you benefit even more, my lord? Duque glanced at her. Of course he knew what she was thinking. Duque didn't get angry and said, Khadgar saw his own fate in a different timeline, but the things he experienced, the choices he made, the pressure he endured, and Khadgar's indomitable will were the key to his growth. Are you sure you want to see it too? I'm sure, Farina said with a look of great loyalty. Duque didn't waste any more time and directly connected with his mind. Then, how could the evil Black Witch be treated the same as the good young Khadgar? The miserable Farina saw many scenes, most of which were fabricated by Duque using the system ELF. In the past, in order to farm for equipment in the game, Duque had led his team to Naxxramas over and over again. Thus, Duque simply made a 3D image of Farina's memories in the game and showed it to Farina. Yes, Khadgar was indomitable while Farina was beaten like a boss in the game over and over again. How could it be the same? In the image of fate, the first half was mostly Farina's memories, but the end of every fate was death. It wasn't that she didn't try to resist, but no matter what method she used to improve herself, she was still defeated in the end. Thousands of reincarnations in the illusory world only lasted a few seconds in reality. Soon, Farina returned from the fate, with a pale face. Yo, Farina, it seems that you still can't be indomitable. Duque comforted Farina hypocritically. Sob sob sob. As expected, submitting to my lord is my only chance to break free from my fate. My lord, you are my final salvation. If there weren't so many people watching, Farina would definitely cry and shout as she hugged Duque's thigh, begging for forgiveness. Yes, Farina's loyalty plus 10. After dealing with all the elemental emissaries, Duque finally heaved a sigh of relief. Sensing Khadgar's soul undulations which were as powerful as a raging river, Duque secretly made an assessment. Breaking dawn. That's it. Only this Khadgar could truly help Duque. Duque returned to the throne of arcane energy, sat upright and slightly raised his head. I hereby announce that in 3 days I will officially break through to the demigod realm. All the preparations were completed. Before breaking through to the demigod realm, Duque contacted his lovers for the last time. He knew that Tyron was currently planning to uproot the insect nests in Silithus. Clipping off Sea Thun's wings was something that could not be rushed. At the same time, it was to buy time for Duque. You must come back. I know you are very confident, but you must be careful and prioritize your own safety. I'll wait for you. The magic communication was filled with blessings as well as a hint of sadness. Regardless of which lover it was, they all knew that this was Duque's path. Although no one knew where Duque's magical path would end, as long as Duque himself decided to stop, as Duque's lovers and most loyal supporters, they had no reason to hold him back. Don't worry. I will succeed. Duque's calm smile revealed his strong confidence. 3 days was not a long time and it passed very quickly. The experts loyal to Duque had already entered Karazhan. On the first floor were the guardian knights of Duke Marcus's family, and then Edwin Van Cleef was in charge. In addition, the 2 maids Vanessa and Solarian were also in charge. Duque was at the highest floor of Karazhan and he had begun to go all out. In an independent space the size of 2 football fields, the ground was covered with magic formations with complicated patterns. These magic formations used the most primitive magic runes of Azeroth, draconic runes. They had many functions such as defending against enemies, communicating with the elemental realm and so on. All the preparations had been done to the limit that Duque could do. Outside the magic formation the 6 elemental emissaries were ready. Duque abandoned all distracting thoughts and let out a long breath. Let's begin. Chapter 1301. Becoming a wizard was a step-by-step process of training. If Earth and Sky wizards were purely communicating with heaven and earth and grasped the power to influence the world, then Morning Star, Radiant Moon and Breaking Dawn would further introduce magic from the elemental world, refining their own power and producing something similar to a nuclear reactor, producing magic in a form that was almost perpetual. Once they advanced further, they would be able to communicate with the entire world with power that surpassed the mortal realm. Demigods were existences that had stepped into the realm of gods. After reading through a large number of ancient books, Duque knew that demigods in Azeroth were not simply demigods who had divinity and used it. With divinity they could only be regarded as pure divine beings, just like the 6 elemental emissaries that Duque had modified. True demigods would forever be a part of Azeroth. Unless they were completely destroyed at their roots, demigods could theoretically be resurrected infinitely. For example, Cenarius' father, the strongest demigod, White Deer Malorn, had been dead for 10,000 years. Who knew that his corpse would come back to scare people? Oh no, to fight against evil. Zhou Xian stood in the middle of the magic formation with a hexagram as its shape. He calmed down and even paused the system elf's assistance, using the power of a wizard to feel the world. Silence. Silence. Complete and utter silence. He closed his eyes and turned off his vision, even using magic to prevent any light from entering his eyes through his eyelids. He used a small amount of magic to turn off his hearing, unable to hear anything from the outside world. 2 thin layers of arcane elemental isolation appeared in his nostrils, filtering out all smells. In the sea of consciousness he isolated his tongue's sense of taste. Finally, his entire soul was pulled out of his body under the effect of the magic formation. It was a very mysterious feeling. His body was clearly below him, but he was floating in the air. Instead of looking back at his body like a curious baby, Zhou Xian let go of his spiritual touch. It extended out from the room. The next second he felt all the sensations in Karazhan. The sound of the wind echoing in the corridor, the spiritual energy undulations of the patrolling Einherjar, the flow of air through the tiny cracks in the walls. In the next second, his spirit sense spread to the entire upwind trail, and he sensed the vitality hidden under the charred ground. In the third second, Zhou Xian's senses had spread to the entire planet Azeroth. Although the feedback was very vague and there were many uncertainties, Zhou Xian was very sure that he could already feel the world's breathing, pulse, the cycle of life and the world's pain. The closest pain came from the southeast, where the cursed land was located. The door of darkness was like a wound left behind by a sharp weapon. Not only was it unable to heal, it was also like an abscess that caused the world to bleed in pain. In the far northwest was Mount Hyjal. The destruction of the Holy Mountain and the World Tree had undoubtedly left a deep scar on this land. The more recent pain came from the far west, and Zhou Xian instinctively sensed that it was Silithus. The ancient god Sea Thun was overdrawing the power of the earth to create its insect servants almost infinitely. However, after the pain, Azeroth's immune system seemed to have been stimulated, or it could be said that Azeroth, which had the consciousness of the cycle of life, finally produced the most intense stress response. That's right. Mother Earth was awakening, and in her unique way she was protecting herself and every life on this planet. Zhou Xian could clearly feel that the shackles of the upper limit of life had been unlocked by Azeroth, and the upper limit of the world's power for the mortal guardians was also rising. Since the door of darkness, Zhou Xian had regarded himself as the guardian of the world, and he had earnestly fulfilled his obligations as a guardian. At the same time, Zhou Xian felt the favor of the goddess of fate, and after Sea Thun came out to cause trouble, he quickly obtained a few portions of divinity. Although Zhou Xian wanted to attribute all the success to his own efforts, Zhou Xian's subconscious was very clear that everything was not a coincidence. Some people were born with divine strength. Some people were born with wisdom. And some people were often accompanied by luck. However, in the mortal world, fate was ever-changing. The fate of millions of people was like duckweed, surging with the waves, unable to control themselves. Even so, the ones who succeeded in the end were the combination of talent, hard work, and luck, and the true king who grew up after experiencing countless tribulations. So today, at the beginning of the opening of the world's authority, Zhou Xian wanted to be the first person to eat crabs. When his soul began to sing and began to call the whole world. Almost immediately the world responded to Zhou Xian. With the appearance of the purple-blue pillar of light at the top of Karazhan's tower, the entire Eastern Kingdom continent, and even the entire world of Azeroth, all professionals and transcendents felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Every powerful existence, one by one, turned their heads and looked in the direction of Karazhan, following the direction of the throbbing in their hearts. The world in front of them seemed to have stopped at this moment. The wind was still and the leaves were hanging quietly. The sand in the air maintained its tumbling posture. Even in the Silithus worm nest, the flying and spinning broken limbs stopped spinning in the air. The light of dawn penetrated the thick clouds and poured down on the earth without any scruples. The whole world was quiet and quiet. Everything in the world fell into silence, as if everything had completely calmed down, bowing its head and making way for the scene that was about to happen. In the center of the endless sea, the big whirlpool that used to be the well of eternity seemed to have changed for no reason. The center of the whirlpool, which was originally spinning clockwise, as if it wanted to suck all the seawater in the world into the other world, suddenly stopped. There was not a single ripple on the surface of the sea, like a mirror reflecting the color of the sky. Unknowingly, Duque opened his eyes, and in his pupils, there was the same whirlpool-like arcane light as in the original endless sea. This time was very short, less than a tenth of a second, and then his pupils became clear again. Even though it was very short, Khadgar was still sharp enough to capture this detail. Khadgar's clear voice was perfectly connected, and the resonance of the soul was immediately produced. In the name of the Wanderer of the Stars, the Seeker of Knowledge and the Supreme Ruler of Arcane Magic, I declare to the world, my Lord Duke Marcus is the Master of Arcane Magic. At this moment, all the mages in the world felt that the magic power in their bodies had begun to slightly deviate. The core of their magic power was leaving them in fear. Chapter 1302. The Lord of the Arcane. It meant that a brand new existence had declared its dominion over arcane power in the name of the world to all mages who used arcane spells in the world. Although this dominion was not complete or absolute, and as long as one carefully sensed it, they would realize that this dominion excluded the dragons. However, being controlled by others was never something that made Pharaoh happy. For example, if a true god who controlled a certain domain wanted to use magic in that domain, he had to use it in the name of that existence and follow its rules. The goddess of the moon Elun was an example. To use any magic related to the moon, the incantation had to be preceded by the words, in the name of the goddess of the moon Elun. Usually one had to offer sacrifices to the goddess of Elun, such as overflowing magic or faith, and use the incantation at the critical moment. Only then would the goddess of the moon care about you. In a domain that was monopolized, it was unreasonable. If you lowered your head, there would be a deal. If you were unhappy, then you could only scram and not use this power. Of course, the one who made the declaration was only a demigod, and his dominion over that domain was not complete. At this time, one had to make a choice. If they were really unhappy, they could add something like free arcane magic in front of the incantation to announce that they were using unowned magic. However, if that demigod became a true god in the future, the person who used unowned magic back then would be recorded in a little black book. Then when he became a god, he would come back to settle the score. Burning that part of your magic circuit was a small matter, but what was worse was that your children and grandchildren would be forbidden from using it. That would be a big problem. Moreover, the one who had announced to become the Lord of the Arcane was Duke Marcus. Countless mages' expressions changed drastically, especially Anastrian from Kuel Salis, who was now the leader of the Forgotten Ones. He gripped his staff tightly with his bony claws that were so dry that there was not a trace of moisture in them. This feeling was like Duque had slapped him in the face. One slap on the left, one slap on the right. Then it repeated endlessly. She was so close to slapping out a few of his white teeth. The only good thing was that Duque had only just begun to try to become a demigod. First, he might not succeed. Second, he was still miles away from becoming a true god. Unfortunately, he was still unhappy. It was clearly his own power, but in his own soul, in his own magic circuit, the wandering arcana energy was being extracted. The arcana energy that was branded with Duque name was forcefully descending. Its unstoppable power was taking over and changing everything. Not every wizard was named Anastrian, and not every wizard had crossed the threshold of Radiant Moon. From this moment onwards, all wizards below the Radiant Moon realm had to quickly recite the words in the name of Duke Marcus before using any arcane magic. Otherwise, they would have to wait for some great power to develop new arcana spells so that they could bypass Duque's arcana rule. Only then could they use arcana spells again. In the Dalajan, in the Sindorii Kingdom, in the Eastern Kingdom, and in Kalimdor, every spellcaster subconsciously raised their heads to look at the sky. They discovered that the ever-changing arcane energy was constantly gathering and scattering in the sky, forming strange and blurry scenes. Mediocre people could only watch the show. Capable people looked at what Duque had shown them after swearing his oath as the Lord of Arcana. It was a brand new arcana secret. I, Khadgar, in the name of Duke Marcus Elemental Emissary, hereby declare that the subtleties of arcana should be known by the world and understood by the world. The power of arcana should be concentrated in the hands of the good, the explorers of magic and the devout. My Lord wishes to accomplish all good deeds in the world. My Lord wishes to destroy all evil deeds in the world. Those who are willing to follow this will and this righteousness, please walk with my Lord. Khadgar's soul declaration was transmitted through the world will, and all the mages in the world were in an uproar. If Duque had just tyrannically declared his power, then this was a classic example of enticing and expressing his stance. These words had two meanings. The first was that there would be rewards for those who believed in him. These rewards were the metamagic abilities, arcane subtlety, and arcane concentration, that the mages themselves had to comprehend. As for the former, arcane subtlety, any decent mage would have to figure out a way to learn it on their own. This was because it could reduce your target's magic resistance by 10 points and reduce the threat of your arcane spells by 40%. There were always people with thick skin in this world. For example, the warriors of the Blackrock tribe were born with high fire resistance. 10 points of resistance was a unit that could reduce the enemy's resistance by a considerable amount. And the threat was to make the enemy more wary of you. For example, if you cut the enemy's arm after they had been anesthetized, they wouldn't feel any pain and wouldn't feel like you were hitting them. Arcane concentration was to further reduce the enemy's resistance to your arcana magic. These two metamagic abilities were very painful even for high-ranked mages. If they rejected Duque, it would mean that they would have to say goodbye to these two metamagic abilities forever. The second meaning was even more direct. Damn it, I'm on the side of justice and kindness. Those who are neutral are fine, but those who are evil can all get out of here. Almost as soon as these words came out, the entire Dalajan was in an uproar. Long live. Praise be to Duke Marcus. In any world, power was in the shape of a pyramid, and those with ultimate power were always in the minority. Most of them were ordinary people at the bottom. Duque's announcement meant that almost every decent mage, as long as they weren't evil cultists, would automatically have two metamagic abilities. For a large group of mages, this was a huge increase in power, or at least 20%. Almost at the same time that Khadgar made the announcement on behalf of Duque, more information regarding arcana magic was transmitted to the souls of the mages, such as the standard of using arcana magic, and that the starting point for exploring arcana magic was to be a Morningstar mage. Every spellcaster could feel Duque's strictness, as well as his demand for mastery of arcana magic. Duque, who was in the middle of the spell formation, did not say a word. He subconsciously lowered his head and found that beneath his feet was no longer a spell formation, nor was it earth, nor was it mountains and rivers. Instead, it was a world of nothingness with only arcana elements left. This world still had the outline of planet Azeroth. He could even transcend matter and space and directly see the souls on the other side of the planet on the Kalimdor continent. Souls of all colors. Although there were countless souls fleeing from this illusory world of arcana magic, some of them were spinning strangely, some were trembling, and some were even desperately trying to break away from this world of arcana magic. Duque sensed that they were things that had begun to decay. Calamity Army. The Forgotten. The corner of Duque's mouth lifted into a mysterious smile. Chapter 1303. The complicated prayers lasted for an hour. Duque was also a little helpless. There was nothing he could do about it. This was because the arcane technique was the core of a mage, and it was also the core of his breakthrough to the demigod realm. Simply crossing the threshold of a demigod wasn't that complicated. If he didn't want to improve, he could just say that he was the guardian of XXX. For example, the wild boar demigod Agamagan, who was killed by two third-rate void dukes. Although he was said to have transformed into the Razor Highland that protected the boars and the boar people after his death, Duque still felt that he was useless. Duque had ambitions and dreams. Otherwise, he would not step into the god domain and just go with the flow like a commoner. Since he wanted to destroy the Burning Legion and break through to the divine realm, then he had to aim for the position of true god. Therefore, from the very beginning, Duque had chosen a broader and more powerful domain as the core strength for his breakthrough into the demigod realm. Duque's announcement to the souls of the entire world made Jaina and Alucia very happy, because from this moment on, they could use other methods to quickly and accurately find out about their lover's condition. Of course, no one knew if those who offended Jaina would have their magic banned after she gave them pillow talk. Just when the pharaoh of the world thought that Duque would be lucky enough to become an arcana god, the pharaoh of the world, in Karazhan, the second elemental emissary, stepped out. The manager, Majordomo Executus, was a fire demon. This was because the pharaoh were currently experiencing the soul connection from the world. Whether they wanted to or not, they had to pay attention to it. If Khadgar, who was the first to run out, could be said to have won the hearts of most of the pharaoh races, then Majordomo Executus, who had just run out, had truly shocked many pharaoh races. Damn, a fire demon had come out. What the hell was this? After all, not every pharaoh knew that Duque was so awesome that he accepted a fire demon as his underling. There was no doubt that Majordomo Executus affected the appearance of the city. He looked weak, but his strength was actually at the level of a boss. The special characteristics of the fire demon made it very difficult to defeat or even kill him with the support of the fire element. He raised his arms high, and the horn-like spikes on the outside of his arms and on his back made a cracking sound when he raised his hands. Every pharaoh in the world noticed that they were hallucinating on their retinas. Countless tiny flames were circling around them, even floating up and flying into the sky. Majordomo Executus' slightly strange accent echoed in the hearts of the pharaoh. I, the fire demon Executus, in the name of my lord, the conqueror of the molten core, the slayer of the fire demon King Ragnaros, and the supreme ruler of the land of fire, declare to the world that my lord is the lord of fire. Almost as soon as Majordomo finished his soul declaration, the entire magic world, and even the entire fire elemental world, experienced a magnitude 12 earthquake. Since ancient times, the four elemental realms had always been in the hands of the four elemental lords. Their dominance over the four elements could be traced back to the War of the Sovereigns 25,000 years ago. Before that, there were no written records of the world. Therefore, Duque's declaration that he was the Lord of Fire was no longer a slap in the face, but a complete declaration of war. As the saying went, cutting off one's path to wealth was like killing one's parents. By doing this, Duque had undoubtedly abused all of Ragnaros' ancestors. Although Lager probably had no ancestors to say, anyway, Duque didn't care. Facing the extremely violent and furious Ragnaros, Duque had already destroyed one of his most important clones. According to the original history, in the future, in the land of fire in Lager's lair, the mortal heroes would definitely fight with Lager. Offending him once was offending him n times was also offending him. Since he had offended Ragnaros to death, Duque wouldn't give Ragnaros any face and directly announced that he was the Lord of Fire. If Duque's declaration to all the pharaoh in the world that he was the Lord of Arcane Magic was slightly overbearing, then it was undeniably domineering now. Almost immediately, Ragnaros, who had been forced to sleep due to being injured again, was forced to wake up. After confirming the soul transmission again, Lager was extremely furious. Duke Marcus, you despicable person who colluded with a traitor to destroy my clones and my holy land. I won't spare you. Just you wait. I swear I will burn you and this damn world to ashes. At this moment, almost every mage could feel the terrifying waves of anger coming from the fire elemental realm. However, the reaction of the pharaoh was, good. Well done. His Excellency Duke Marcus is mighty and domineering. Almost every mage cheered and jumped for joy. It was simple. Compared to the ownerless arcane elements, the more primitive fire element basically had a master, and its master was the elemental demigod Ragnaros. Of course, this guy wasn't a good person. He had always occupied the fire element and forbade anything other than fire elemental beings from using it. However, when he fought against the Titans in the War of Domination, he was viciously defeated. In the end, he was greatly injured and imprisoned in the elemental plane, losing his absolute control over the fire element. This was why mortal mages had the opportunity to use the fire element. Of course, in order to avoid Lager's lord, the mages had no choice but to choose spells that consumed more magic power. Duque had complained countless times in the past. Playing with fire spells really consumes a lot of magic power. Now that Duque was fighting Ragnaros for control over the fire element, no matter what the result was, at least he could vent his anger. Moreover, Duque was now making a big deal out of it. With a wave of his hand, he announced that as long as he succeeded in becoming a demigod, the magic power consumption of all fire spells would be reduced by 20%. This time, every mage was so excited that they cried out in joy. I can't. Lord Duke Marcus, please succeed in becoming a demigod. Please become the god of mages. All of the Dalajan and even all of the pharaoh's compatriots in the magic world were in an uproar. With the ecstasy of the fire element and the elemental emissary of the ice element, the ice dragon Saffron appeared. The prayer changed. I am Saffron. In the name of my lord Duke Marcus, I declare that my lord is the incarnation of frost, the transcender of absolute zero, the blizzard that freezes all evil. This time it sounded very famous. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Duke's demand for the frost domain was relatively low. It was just enough for him to use. Others were puzzled by this. Why was Duke so domineering towards other domains, but so uninterested in the frost domain? Jaina was the only one who burst into tears. Sparkling tears streamed down her exquisite face. She knew that it wasn't that Duke didn't have the courage to do it, but that the god of ice element was left for her to break through. Chapter 1304. Duke announced that his divine realm involved 3 elements. In the eyes of outsiders, Duke definitely wanted to become the god of mages. It was natural for the strongest archmage to want to break through the limits and become the god of mages. No one was surprised. Just like when Medivh borrowed the magic of the Tirisful Parliament to break through to the demigod realm, he chose the space magic that he was best at. That was why Medivh was an interstellar wanderer. Before this, only mages were affected. Because it was a time of war, many pharaoh had priests around him. Regarding this grand occasion, the priests held an indifferent attitude and came to watch the show. At most, they carefully savored the special elemental aura around the mages. Soon they found something strange. The air was filled with the familiar holiness of the priests and holy knights. It was as if they were in the Holy Church of Stratholme, or the Lights Hope Chapel in the Eastern Plague Lands. The holy statues of the sages stood in the middle of it, gazing at everyone with eyes that seemed to transcend time and space. Wait. Don't tell me Lord Duke Marcus wants to dabble in the holy light too? They guessed right. The next person who appeared shocked all the priests and made them lose the ability to speak. This was because in their spiritual vision, they saw the former Archbishop of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. Holy Light above, Lord Fail has been resurrected? No. Look at his body, it's translucent. Is that a Holy Spirit? It should be. In the elemental domain, most priests were amusing idiots with little knowledge. They would never guess that Alonso's was now a light elemental creature. I, Alonso's Fail, accept the request of my friend Duke Marcus to be his envoy of Holy Light. In the name of my friend, I swear that my friend is the preacher of Holy Light, the guardian of truth and justice. My friend will spread the 3 great virtues and dispel all evil in the world. From the perspective of the origin of the world, this announcement was not the most powerful one. But from the perspective of the mortal world, this announcement caused the most shock. In the church square of Stormwind City, the commoners who gathered to pray every day saw the entire Church of Holy Light emitting dazzling golden light that pierced the clouds. In the distance, people seemed to hear countless little angels singing happily. In the church, every monk, priest, and holy knight saw it with their own eyes. The statue of the sage was actually trembling slightly. The holy light surging on the statue was like the ripples set off by the wind blowing on the surface of the water, one after another, shaking non-stop. Holy light above. Praise you, Duke Marcus. Sure enough, your name will become sacred. Duke Marcus, your name will indeed become holy. If Dukla's appearance of Alonso's Fail could be said to be shocking, then the appearance of Dark Witch Farina would cause the warlocks to be burnt to a crisp. Although Farina had tried her best to wear a dignified gown, she had played the honey trap for so long. Her coquettish charm had already seeped into every corner of her soul. Therefore her every move seemed so charming. Even her declaration seemed to be an invitation. I am Farina the Black Witch. I have answered the call of my lord, and I hereby announce to the world that my lord is the Blade of Darkness. He does not use the power of darkness but does things of light. After Farina, it was Thaddeus' turn to make a similar announcement. However, after the initial shock, his existence seemed to be dispensable. Only the druids and shamans who were closest to nature and used the power of wind and lightning heard Thaddeus' announcement. They were extremely embarrassed. Damn it, you're a mage, yet you've already dabbled in the power of wind and lightning. Then what are we, the true envoys of nature, supposed to do? What was interesting was that Sal had heard it too. The tribal chief had a constipated expression on his face. The world-class announcement of the 6 elemental emissaries was indeed shocking. Duque knew very well that this was just an appetizer. Could even be a stepping stone for a mortal to step into the god realm. One could only rely on themselves to pass the trial. Countless extraordinary beings in the world had their eyes on the outside of Karazhan. Even though Karazhan's perfect protection blocked these gazes from directly peeping inside, Duque could still clearly feel all this. Some were kind, curious, malicious, prying, and there were also those who were ready to watch a joke. Although Duque used arcane, fire, and ice as his foundation, and the other 3 as supplements, it seemed clear at first glance that he had a wide range of powers and a promising future. Only the extraordinary knew that the difficulty for Duque to step into the god realm was already dozens of times higher than that of ordinary weak demigods. Considering that Duque was going to fight Ragnaros, the king of fire demons, in the end, the increase in difficulty caused by the difficulty of invisibility was immeasurable. What the outside world thought and did was the outside world's business. Even though outside the magic array his 6 elemental emissaries were constantly chanting prayers, Duque was completely unaware of it. He calmed down, completely calming down. At the same time he slowly opened the system genie. With the help of the system he adjusted every cell in his body, striving to make the compatibility between his body and soul infinitely close to 100%. The magic hidden in his blood began to flow with the pulse of his heart, pouring into every corner of his body. In the magic circuit, with the arcane circuit as the core, ice and fire as supplements, holy, shadow and thunder as secondary, it began to carry out an orderly self-cycle, spreading the benefits. Bothump, bothump. The beating of the heart and the pulsation of the magic circuit turned into a sound. The sound became louder and louder, like the beating of a drum, resounding through the highest levels of Karazhan. At this time, Duque's appearance had completely changed. It looked like Duque, except that his outline was still Duque. He no longer looked like a human with a physical body. The energy of the 6 major elements appeared on the surface of Duque's body, forming countless curved lines. These thin lines were like hundreds of thousands of spider webs, densely covering the surface of Duque's skin. In the surrounding void, countless elemental energy was attracted over, and after being filtered by the magic array, it became extremely pure energy, shooting towards the surface of Duque's body and quickly penetrating his whole body. At first there was only a faint glow under Duque's skin, but then the faint glow that emerged became more and more intense, and then became even more dazzling. His whole body seemed to have become a complete elemental body. That was only on the surface, and in fact the transformation was not yet complete. Duque carefully controlled the balance of elemental energy in his body through the system. Even with the help of the system, this was still a task that required great care. Dancing on the edge of a blade could not describe the difficulty of this task. Chapter 1305. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be like driving a sports car at 300 km per hour on a bad road where a few pieces of gravel could jump out at any time with one hand on the steering wheel and the other out of the window, and then, in an instant, complete the standard sense of threading a needle. This was not something that could be done after showing off and running away. If he was not careful, not only would he explode in minutes, even Karazhan and even half of the Elven Forest and Twilight Forest would suffer. Duque clenched his teeth and then, like embroidery on a grain of rice, he carefully controlled the system elf to further purify the seemingly pure elements that had been absorbed into his body. With arcane spells as the foundation, flames and frost as the branches, and holy, shadow and thunder as the support, he separated the impurities from his body at high speed while further fusing the magic. He carefully compressed them, wrapped them with his consciousness, and directed them to where they needed to go under his spiritual guidance. At the same time, every drop of magic was branded with Duque's soul. It was a very fast process. Even though there were tens of thousands of pores all over his body that were filled with magic, Duque, with the help of the system elf, seemed to have divided his soul into tens of thousands of parts, and each part was doing its own job: filtration, purification, sublimation. His soul was in great pain. The pain that exceeded the limits of the physical body was not something that could be suppressed by any type of anesthetic. Because in a sense, Duque was giving up his human body and was transitioning into a spiritual body that was close to an elemental body. Very painful. Very painful. Heart-wrenching pain. So painful that his skin was cracking inch by inch. The feeling of being torn into millions of pieces and then ground into powder almost made Duque collapse. But when the pain reached its peak, all of a sudden, it disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a sublimation. His whole soul was light, and under his feet, there seemed to be a colorful, blurry world that was opening a door that belonged only to him, Duque. Come. Welcome our new companion. A misty neutral voice said in the common language. The 6 elements stood in a 6-pointed star position, floating behind Duque. His soul slowly descended, and the next moment, Duque felt as if a certain unimportant memory of his was being asked if he could read it. Duque subconsciously agreed. Then, a majestic palace appeared in front of him. It was a Gothic palace, somewhat similar to Notre Dame de Paris, an epoch-making landmark in the history of European architecture on Earth. The first thing that came into view was the towering spire that pierced through the clouds. The facade had a unique style and the structure was rigorous. It looked very majestic and solemn. It is divided longitudinally by pilasters into 3 blocks, and horizontally by 3 bands of ornamentation, of which at the bottom, there are 3 recessed doorways. Above the doorway was the so-called demigod corridor. On it were statues representing the forest god Cenarius, the white deer god Malorn and many others. Higher up was the corridor of the true god. There were clearly 6 statues, but the only ones that Duque could distinguish were the moon goddess Elun and sea Thun. The rest were all blurry. The huge and luxurious door opened with a loud bang. Duque strode in. The scene in front of him made Duque a little stunned. The inside was more like a semicircular theater, and the position at the front was obviously for the true god. As a newly ascended demigod, Duque could only be at the outermost circle. Duque didn't mind. Following the guidance of his soul, he found an empty position. He wasn't surprised that such a large temple was empty, because he saw a huge illusory existence next to his position. It was an existence that seemed both real and fake, as if it was pretending to sleep, but it also seemed like it was really sleeping. Even in this life, Duque didn't directly come into contact with it, but he could still recognize it from its green appearance. It was the demigod Cenarius who should have been killed by Grandpa Roar. Duque frowned slightly. He walked around the huge Cenarius, and when he came to his position, an elemental throne with 6 colors rose naturally and lifted Duque's body onto the throne. At the same time, Duque saw his name in a daze. It was like a pen sticker used by primary school students. It was an empty name with only a hook and no meaning. It floated not far from Duque's chest. Duque pointed his finger, and the 6 elements automatically condensed on his finger according to the proportion. Duque used his finger as a pen and wrote his name in a flamboyant manner. The illusory frame absorbed Duque's name like soil absorbing rainwater. In his spiritual vision, Duque could feel the magic power in his body disappearing at the speed of a river. At the same time, with the magic power stirring, it seemed to have become a chaotic mass with 6 colors in his spiritual sea. It was very unclear. Gradually, slowly, Duque could tell that it was the divinity he had absorbed into his body. Under the washing of the high-purity magic power, the 6 types of divinity merged into one and bloomed with the light of life. The chaos was constantly washed away and the divinity in his perception became clearer. The mark of the previous owner in the divinity separated at this time and attached a new soul name. Blue arcane magic, red flames, white frost, golden holiness, black shadows, purple thunder. The 6 colors blended and quickly formed a rainbow. Following the movements of Duque's hands, it was shaped and fixed in Duque's soul. This was Duque engraving his name in the core of the world. It was also Duque shaping his demigod soul, a super strong soul that was far superior to ordinary souls. Duque's magic power and soul power continued to be consumed at a high speed at this time. If it was an ordinary demigod who did not have enough accumulation, they might run out of power and then be destroyed on the way to becoming a demigod. But Duque was not an ordinary demigod. Since he had chosen a more complex divinity structure, he also had a wider source of divine power. He could even clearly feel that on the two continents of the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor, countless mages, priests, druids and shamans were supporting him faintly, using their overflowing magic to quietly replenish Duque's consumption. Similarly, in the fire elemental world and the water elemental world, there was also a good amount of magic replenishment. Of course, as the core arcane magic, Duque could only rely on Karazhan's reserves. That was the overflowing energy from the void and other spaces that Karazhan had accumulated for countless years. Suddenly Duque saw a vague figure. Although it was vague, he still recognized who it was at a glance. Medivh. Chapter 1306. That's right. It was Medivh. Medivh, who was supposed to live a happy retirement after the third battle of the Dark Portal, made a move at this time. It was a powerful force hidden at the bottom of Karazhan that even Duque did not perceive. Duque was a little taken aback. If old Max wanted to trick him, he could blow up his lair in minutes and he wouldn't have a place to cry. Fortunately, Duque was the inheritor who truly inherited Medivh's aspirations and legacy. Well done. But don't waste your power. The higher your starting point for becoming a demigod, the greater your chance of becoming a true god. Across the void, Medivh's voice reached the depths of Duque's soul. Yes. Duque nodded heavily. In this world there were many extraordinary people. For example, before transmigrating, there were people who could complete 1-micron level polishing. There were people who could complete electric welding that even the most sophisticated welders could not. That was both the craftsmanship of the great nation's craftsmen and the display of the limits of the human body. With the help of the system Elf, Duque's fine control of magic made it so that not a trace of magic was wasted. The magic passed through the soul shell, converged, condensed, and then refined. One could see the divinity condensing at high speed, forming the form Duque wanted. Before this, Duque, who had read countless ancient books and visited Aegwin, learned that every demigod had to condense their own divinity symbol. This symbol was both the symbol of a demigod and the source of his core power. The animal-type demigod was very simple. Its symbol was himself, and at most it could strengthen a certain part. For example, the god of boars strengthened his pair of fangs. But Duque was working towards the position of the god of mages, and it would be a bit of a waste to have a human form that looked exactly like himself. The divinity symbol could be used to do more things. After thinking hard for a long time, Duque made his decision. At this moment, Duque did not hesitate. The divinity symbol began to appear. First it was a line, then countless parallel lines, and then branches intersected with each other, forming nodes, turning into a huge web. At first glance, Duque looked like a spider weaving a web. However, that was not the case. Because if someone were to observe carefully, they would discover that there was something like a broadcast tower at each node, sending out magical fluctuations. What Duque did was to cover the entire planet Azeroth with his net. With Duque's current strength, it was actually quite strenuous. Therefore, Duque avoided the important and focused on the trivial. He established the thickest network and the most powerful signal devices in every alliance or horde main city in the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor continent. That's right. What Duque was going to do was to build a magic internet, and every node would be a super large router that would spread his network wirelessly like a Wi-Fi signal. The weave is a good thing. More brainless operation, faster speed and less mana consumption. The price he paid was just the free magic power that Pharaoh gave him when he wasn't using magic. Do you want to get on the weave? Sure, please enter your Wi-Fi password. Great Duque spell. Duque big magic stick. Demigod Duque great magic stick. It seemed that Duque was definitely a saint. Since ancient times, there had never been someone with such a conscience. In fact, Duque was very unscrupulous. This was like a bank helping customers save money and giving them a current interest of 1%. Then if anyone wanted a loan, 8% would be the minimum. This was not Duque being unscrupulous. His honest and reliable little husband had explained it. Ordinary borrowing of magic power was not a problem. He could use the magic power that he saved daily. What if he needed to overdraw? The interest was higher and it was daily interest. The consequences of not paying back money owed to the bank were very serious. In a society governed by law, the most they could do was to blacklist you and forbid you from spending too much. Even if he died, he would have to pay the debt. If he really died, even his soul would have to work for Duque. Cough cough. At this moment, not a single pharaoh had realized how kind Duque's unscrupulous work was. When Duque spread the magic network across the 2 continents, Duque finally stepped onto the ladder of demigods. Duque's soul returned to his brand new body and slowly opened his eyes. The awakened Duque's black eyes shone with the light of new life. In the name of Duke Marcus, I announce the establishment of the magic network. The voice was not loud, but it reverberated throughout the entire magic world like thunder. The ones who heard it the most were naturally the mages, followed by the priests and finally the warlocks, shamans, druids and holy knights. The entire fire and water elemental world, along with the arcane energy that reverberated in the starry sky outside the Azeroth atmosphere, injected magic power into the magic network that covered the 2 continents. The trembling of the elemental sea had turned into a roar at this moment. This low and novel sound resonated thousands of times, as if it was tempting every spellcaster to try it. The first pharaoh to try the crab appeared. In the Dalajan shooting range, a morning star wizard shouted, "I once trained under Lord Marcus. Though he never took me in as a direct disciple, he definitely wouldn't cheat me." With that, he raised his magic staff and chanted an incantation. To be honest, those who hung out often knew each other's capabilities. The onlookers were astonished to see that the power of this fellow's pyroblast had increased by more than 30%. Originally, it could only hit a magic target halfway, but now it was sent flying. Wow. That's amazing. New things were often more difficult to implement. Duque had originally considered this point, which was why he had given such a huge discount. Who knew that while ideals were beautiful, reality was cruel? It was not that no one used it, nor was it that no one was willing to pay. It was just that too many people used it and the mana in the magic network could not keep up. Damn, Duque cursed, hurriedly drawing in more mana from the 2 major elemental realms. The water elemental realm was still fine. The great water elemental lord, Neptulin, had died in the War of Domination and had yet to be revived. However, the boss of the fire elemental realm, Ragnaros, was still here. Even though he had been in a state of deep sleep to recover, he had long since been woken up by Duque. Faced with Duque, who had announced that he would raid his home and still had the audacity to ask for mana from his lair, Ragnaros immediately shouted in the fire elemental language. There was no need to translate those vulgar words that would lead children astray. In any case, the general gist of it was, "Uncle can bear it, aunt can't bear it. Phew, Duque whatever." The fire elemental mana was stuck and Duque almost died on the spot. As a demigod, he did not have the ability to absorb mana from the fire elemental realm. Seeing that the fire elemental mana in the weave was about to be exhausted, the unscrupulous merchant Duque made up his mind and used his ultimate move. The final explanation belongs to the master of the weave, the demigod Duke Marcus. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.